Okay, we're going to call this meeting to order. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Hannah and Coughlin. That the regular meeting of the Council of the Township of Springwater of May 16, 2018 come to order at 6:30 p.m. All those in favor? Carried. I'd ask you to stand if you're able for the national anthem and then remain standing.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Please remain standing for a brief moment of private reflection or private prayer. Please be seated. I'll now turn to council and see if anyone has a disclosure of pecuniary interest and on any of the matters that are on tonight's agenda. If you think of something as it pops up, just mention it at that time and we will note it. So now we have a public meeting, and before I move into that, I need to bring it to order. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Alan and Austin? That this public meeting of council held under Section 12 of the Development Charges Act, 1997, as amended, be called to order at 6:32 p.m. All those in favor? Carried. So welcome to this public meeting of Springwater Township Council held in compliance with Section 12 of the Development Charges Act to give the public an opportunity to express their views in regard to the proposed development charges background study and bylaw. The first part of this meeting is to present the proposal. Following that, an opportunity will be given to enable those who have any comments, concerns, or inquiries with regard to this proposal and make their views known to council. In addition to any comments made at this meeting, written presentations would also be welcomed by council. Any persons who wish to speak should give their name and address. All comments or questions should be addressed through the chair, and that's me. Oral submissions will form part of the public meeting minutes record, including the name and the address of the speaker as information collected under the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. The minutes of the meeting will be posted on the township website. And now I'll call on Gary Scanlon of Watson Associates to make a presentation. Please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, staff, and the public. Pleasure to be here. We've provided an overview of our background study. This is a mandatory process. As part of the process, we have to develop a background study to support the calculations, and then for 2 months have the document in circulation prior to council considering a bylaw, and part of that process is to have a public meeting. This public meeting, like many other public meetings that are held by the municipality, The chair has provided opening remarks. There'll be a presentation and then questions either from the public or council, and then close the meeting. When the meeting's closed, council will not be considering the bylaw at this time. The bylaw will subsequently be considered June 20th. As I've noted, this is under the Development Charges Act. The Development Charges Act really has been around for about 60 years, or the development charges have been around for 60 years. We've had Development Charges Act from 1989, and this process has been fairly standardized since that time. This is an overview of the process we've been going through with staff and with council. We commenced in October last year to initiate the study. We've been undertaking numerous meetings with staff. We had a council workshop in mid-February, followed by a stakeholder meeting to review the preliminary findings of the act. Further meetings in April, and we released the development charge study on April 19th. As you can see, the public meetings tonight, and to finalize the process, bylaw consideration on June the 20th. As noted, development charges have been around for quite a while. They've evolved over time with some refinements, but generally they're charges that municipalities impose to recover the growth-related capital costs, the infrastructure, in order to support the growth. These charges are in addition to what's required to be constructed directly by the developing landowner. Normally those are internal water mains, sewers, roads, street lights, etc. They're referred to as local services, and I'll touch upon them later in my presentation. Very simply, at a very high level, the way the Act is constructed is we identify the amount, type, and location of growth. We identify the servicing needs to accommodate that growth. Those servicing needs translate into capital projects or capital costs. Excuse me. I got a bit of a tickle in my throat. From those capital costs, there's a number of deductions, grant subsidies, other contributions. Consider whether there's a direct benefit to the existing community as a result of those works. There's a statutory 10% deduction for the softer works, the parks, recreation, libraries, those type of softer cost. We have to do service standard measurements, and those service standard measurements generally put an upper limit on what we can collect. And then we have to rationalize any monies in the development charge reserve funds moving from one bylaw to the next. We then end up with a net capital cost, which we must allocate between residential and non-residential development, and then basically divide it back by the growth to come up with the charges. Very simply, in a very the schematic kind of identifies what I've just gone through. We've got the infrastructure on the top, and that translates into an amount of dollars the municipality needs to recover from the development community to pay for the growth-related infrastructure. We divide by that growth to come up with the residential and non-residential charges, and you can see the charges on the very right-hand side. We have residential charges that are based on different types of units. So we have low, medium, which are singles and semi-detached, medium density, which are townhouses, and high density, which are apartment units. So that's the residential. And on the non-residential side, we translate it into a cost per square foot. And as buildings are constructed, the gross floor area of the building is charged, the development charge that we calculate. The Act does set up certain instances where the municipality may not recover or not impose the charge. Not many, but there are there's a non-residential statutory requirement. If you have an existing industrial building, you can expand up to 50% of that building, and we cannot impose the charge on the first 50% expansion. Subsequent to that, those charges can be put into place. For a residential, we've got low density. If I have a single family home that I wish to add 2 additional apartments, I can do that and not pay the charge as long as I don't more than double the size of my original building by adding those 2 additional apartments. If you have a medium density, so townhouses, you have high density apartments, you can add one additional unit, and once again, you don't have to pay the charge. The last bullet just identifies that there's a mandatory exemption through the local government sector. So the charges that we create, you may not impose on the county or the school boards that have jurisdiction within your area. Similarly, if you build an arena or a fire station or whatever, the county can't charge you for that new building, or the school boards won't charge you for that building. Subsequent to that, council can consider further refinements. We call them discretionary exemptions, and those are where you fine-tune the policies to perhaps consider exemptions for or a reduction in the charge, either for types of development or classes to development. A class of development would be really industrial, for example. Types of developments may be places of worship or affordable housing. So it's not mandatory, but it's something council may want to consider imposing. If the charge is going up considerably, some councils consider phase-in policies, maybe over a year or two, to provide some time to consider the change in the charges. The last point is it's called a redevelopment credit, and you won't find it in the Act. It's arisen through case law, but it basically recognizes that if I knock down my house or my house burns down, I can replace that house and not have to pay the charge. Now, normally that's put into place. You've got roughly 4 or 5 years to replace that building and not have to pay the charge for the replacement. If we're extending over with the building was there 20 years ago, that's too long. We would actually impose the full charge on that in that situation. Your current policies, which have been reflected in the draft bylaw currently, is to give exemptions to colleges of applied arts and technology, places of worship, and public hospitals. And those have been continued in our draft bylaw. Redevelopment, as I talked about, most municipalities across Ontario either give a 4 or a 5 year time horizon to replace those buildings. You've utilized 5 years, and we've continued that in the draft bylaw. Timing of payment will be at the time you enter into the first building permit. There may be certain instances where you may look to have the developing landowner accelerate the timing or in place the services, and you can do that through an agreement under the Development Charges Act. So that's on an ad hoc basis. Once we have the charge in place, the charge can be indexed annually, and it would be done on January 1st. And there's a construction cost index that's approved or identified under the Statistics Canada, and that one is the one that we use for indexing the charge. It generally tracks tender prices, so it's not a bad, indexing cost calculation to adjust annually your charges. Excuse me. I talked about local service policy very early on. This is where the developer has the responsibility to put into place certain works such as internal water mains, sewers, roads, sidewalks, etc. And that's defined under the Act as a local service. So as part of the background studies, what we need to be clear is what's the developer responsibility, which is directly their cost, and then what are we including within the development charge. So that you've had in the past, we've continued that practice. One of the things is that we've done a little further defining of the local service policies as a result of Bill 73, which the province made some changes to the Development Charges Act effective January 1st, 2016. And it's under this section that talks about no additional levies. And basically it says that, through the Development Charges Act and your local service policy, you define what the charges are directly to the developer. And you have to be clear, because if we're not clear in your local service policy, the developer can then ask for a credit against the DC. So we may have thought they would be, or in our minds, they would be paying for certain things. If we're not clear, they may come back and ask for a credit, and then actually you're going to be potentially out of pocket or a little bit of a deficit in your funding. So we worked extensively with staff to fine tune those policies, and they're in chapter or Appendix E to our document. And it really deals, as I've noted, with a lot how we're dealing with water, wastewater, storm servicing, what quality the land will be in when they dedicate it for park purposes, and then how we're going to deal with things such as internal trails and bike lanes, etc. So I won't spend a lot of time, but I'd invite you to consider the Appendix E to our document. All councils, when they're moving through this process, there's always a balance that needs to be looked at. On the one side, as you grow, it stimulates a significant amount of capital infrastructure. Obviously, water, wastewater, storm, whether it be the pipes or the treatment or the pumping services are tremendously expensive, roads. And then to a lesser extent, but still important, are the parks, the libraries, the arenas, etc. So there's a significant amount of cost that comes forward to the municipality. Passing a development charge bylaw is not mandatory. It's permissive. It's you as a municipality to consider. But if you don't pass a development charge bylaw to recover the growth-related costs, it ends up being basically recovered through property taxes or through your water and your sewer rates. And with all the deductions that are in the Development Charges Act, the current version of the Act is not full cost recovery. Back when they first came out in 1989, it was pretty close to 100% full cost recovery, but there's a number of reductions, deductions, exemptions, etc., where for the most part you're only recovering, say, 75%, maybe 80% of your growth-related costs, and the rest of the costs have to be borne directly by property taxes or water and sewer rates. So it's not full cost recovery. So in this triangle, you can either attempt to recover what you're allowed to, you can make some reductions, you don't have to recover, but anything you don't recover from development charges moves to the bottom right-hand side, being picked up from the existing taxpayer or ratepayer. Getting into the calculations, what's provided for is a growth forecast. We've looked at a 10-year planning horizon for the softer services. We're limited to 10 years for things such as park development and recreation services, etc. As we move out for the harder services, we basically have a longer term: fire, police, roads, water, wastewater, storm. We can generally use any planning horizon. The growth forecast here talks about, just demonstrates where you've been in the past, and that's the black. And you've had levels of development ranging from a low of about 50 up to about 225 units. And what's anticipated as we move forward is a more significant level of building activity, and you can see that moving out over time. The bluish lines reflect single and semi-detached units. The burgundy are medium density, and you can see there's some provision in there for apartments, so your higher density over time. So the forecast here has been utilized for developing many of the calculations. If we look at a 10-year forecast, we've looked at a population increase of about 11,300 people. That's arising from the construction of about 3,900 units. To 2031, it's about 16,500 people, and that's arising from about 5,700 units. You see the non-residential building activity is 1.4 million, going to about 2.1. We've also, because we've done some area-specific calculations, we've got growth specifically within Antin Mills, Elmville, Hillsdale, Centerville, Vespra, the Midhurst Secondary Plan area, and Snow Valley. The current charges that you have in place, you've got really two components. The first half, the upper half, recovers roads and what we call related, which for the most part are roads and AT and sidewalks and maybe some bicycle provision, right, bicycle lanes. You get into public works and fleet, outdoor recreation, which is parkland development, indoor rec, which is your recreation facilities, protection services, fire, you've got library, and then general government. So across the entire municipality, these charges would be imposed no matter if you're in the rural area or one of the urban development areas. And that's $10,500 for singles and semi-detached, about $8,800 for medium density, and then ranging from about $4,100 to $6,600 for small and large apartments. Yeah, the cost for non-residential is about almost $30 per square meter. That translates into about $2.80 per square foot. And then you can see there's charges in place for area-specific, generally recovering your water, wastewater, and storm. We've looked to recover the same cost for the same types of services, same breakdown. You can see, though, that there's a couple of areas that aren't included this time around, generally because either we've collected enough money to pay for those services, or the growth has been the anticipated growth has been fulfilled. So we're just calculating area specific for Elmsville, Hillsdale, Anton Mills, Midhurst, and Central Vesper. I apologize for the size of this. This tries to break down the charges. Once again, the upper section is your municipal-wide charges. You can see we're roughly about $10,600 before. We're moving to about $11,800, so about $1,100 or $1,200 increase for the municipal-wide charges. You can see similarly we've got the low density, your medium density, and then your high density over here. We've also provided a charge for special care, special dwelling units. We're finding a lot of municipalities now are getting retirement homes or nursing homes and such, so we've provided an extra charge that can be imposed in those type of developments. And then for your non-residential square footage, on a per square meter, it's going from about $30 to about $36 per square meter. These are all of the charges that have been done on an area-specific basis, and then the lower part just adds them up. I'll show you a comparison on more of a graph in a moment, and maybe that'll be more helpful to see. Here we can see, as I've noted, we're going from about $10,600 to about $11,800 for the municipal-wide charges, and then you can see the calculated charges. We're seeing a reduction in Anton Mills, increase in Elmvale, Hillsdale, a reduction, Minising and Phelpston. As I've noted, those have been pretty well completed. And then somewhat of an increase of about $1,000, $1,200 for Center Vespa, and a marginal cost for Midhurst. Now, I would note that Midhurst, since it's your key significant growth area, there's not a lot of cost there because most of the costs have been identified as a local service. So that whole secondary plan area is considered an area that the developers will be doing cost sharing on their own to basically construct the water, wastewater, storm, and roads related works. So not much here because most of it is articulated in the local service policy. This is your non-residential charge. I've talked about the change in the municipal wide, and you can see that there's been a slight increase in Elmvale, and then a reduction in all the different areas on the non-residential side. Just trying to present a chart. You can see this gives you, for the most part, all the municipalities within the county. It includes Barrie as well as Aurelia. You can see that the highest charges, we've got the upper tier charges, We've got the lower local charges, and for the most part, the education charges that are currently in place. And then we've calculated the full charge that would be considered at the time of a building permit being taken out. You can see generally you're in the exact same range that you were before. Some of your charges are lower than areas such as Essa and Clearview. Your spring water charges the Elmvale and the Anton Mills are basically at about where Stayner is currently, between Wasaga Beach and Stayner. And then you can see it's considerably more in places such as Bradford, West Gwillimbury, and Innisfil, Barrie, Collingwood, etc. You're ranging up to a total of about $78,000 for a single detached home. Your highest charges being recommended right now are in the range of about $31,000. So considerably lower than those charges imposed down the road. On the non-residential side, basically it's a very similar type of relationship. You can see on a cost per square meter, the total is about the highest amount is about $115 per cubic meter. For those that are still square footage inclined, it's a little less than $11 per square foot. You can see New Tecumseth and Innisfil have the highest charges in and around $240 to $260 per square meter. For the most part, your charges are at the lower end for the non-residential. And this is for industrial. Sometimes municipalities vary the industrial charges. Once again, you can see you're in the exact same position at the lower end of the range. That concludes my presentation. As I say, there's the full background study, which provides much more depth into how the calculations were undertaken and the projects that support them. As I noted, when we close tonight's meeting, there'll be no consideration of the charges, but we'll be back on June 20th for council's consideration of the bylaw.
Thank you, and if you want to just stay there, first of all, I'll turn to the audience. Is there any comments or questions you have regarding the presentation we just received? I invite you to come forward, your name, address, and Mr. Scanlon or someone may be able to respond to whatever those queries might be. I'll come back once more to the audience. I'll turn to council now, and maybe we'll do two at a time and work our way and through it. Councilor Ritchie.
Thank you, Mayor French, and thank you for the presentation. I'd like to know why, if you can go back to that slide there, for why is Elmvale higher than all the others?
15. Sorry.
15.
This one? This is my 15. I don't know what your 15 is.
You're going from a 24,859 to a 31,000 and change. There's about a $6,000 increase.
Okay.
It's higher than all the rest of them. My
Right.
question is why?
It's the works that have been identified to support that. And it's,
In regards to works as to what? Through the mayor to,
Yeah,
yes. Just
I
give me-
think a majority, actually, Director Schmidt will respond to that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councilor Ritchie. So it's actually more the area specific. So the water wastewater costs that were being proposed in the DC is really driving up the overall charge for Elmvale. So in the background study, there are a number of capital projects that are proposed over the next number of years to support growth in Elmvale, and hence it's really the area specific charge that's going from, I think, around $3,600 to about $9,000, which is the difference.
If I might, through you, Mr. Mayor, I just note that if you wanted to look at it, it's page 5-19 and 5-20. And 520 is identifying about $5 or $6 million just in wastewater servicing. There's a lift pumping station. There's a portion of expanding the wastewater treatment plant, so they need treatment capacity. So those are the big ticket items that are here for wastewater, and then there's about a little over $1 million for water-related projects. So it's those works that are providing for the increase.
No, it's all good information, and my concern is that, that's an area where I want to see some growth, and if you want to see that growth, you want to keep your DC charges down, so how do we facilitate that? So we go with what all the work has been done, and that's what projects it, I guess.
These are the works that have to be built to support that level of growth.
Yeah, and I guess unfortunately, the simple equation is you don't have that much development to amortize those costs over, where some of the larger ones, where if you look at Midhurst, we're doing it over thousands of units, and so it's adjusted accordingly. But yeah, we'll carry on.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Hanna.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, sir. I found your report easy to follow, so I appreciate the
thank you.
way you put it together. I just have two questions. My first one, on slide 3, you talk about a meeting with the Midhurst Landowners Group. Given that going forward with the major development that's planned to take place there, there'll be a lot of DC contributions made by the Midhurst Landowners Group. My question is there anything significant that you were able to learn from that meeting with the Midhurst Landowners Group that you want to share with this council? And more specifically, I'm looking at timing, whether there's any possibility for upfront funding and that type of thing. I know that's things we've talked about over the years, but I just would like you to clarify if there's anything you were able to determine.
Through the mayor, the way it's set up right now is all of those hard services are the responsibility of the developing landowners. They've set up with a trustee, and then they will, figure out the staging commensurate with how they would like to stage their developments and the appropriate services, and obviously in conjunction with discussions with staff. Some of the things they did talk about is whether there may be, is making sure that everybody signs on to the agreement, so that, everybody within the secondary plan area will contribute their fair share. So we've had some preliminary discussions. There's certain ways that we might be able to assist them in doing a cost sharing, but in no way putting the municipality in any financial exposure. But any way that we can assist them to help to do the cost sharing, it's reasonable to help them in that way.
Thank you, and to the end of that, I guess I would suggest that the more money we can get from development charges, like in Elmvale, the more services we can provide and the less taxpayers have to pay. My second question is to do with part of your examination or your review. Did you look at any of the projects that we've identified going forward and the amount of tax or development charges we put forward? Like some of the things we've got on our projects that are growth related, we're suggesting that we can pay for that 90% DCs, some are 50% DCs. So my question is, did you look at those, and are there anything that you found that's not consistent with we as a township that have suggested we can charge?
No, I think I think you've looked at all the opportunities to recover your capital items. I mean, you're still working continuously about identifying things such as new fire stations, new arenas, new things like that. We've had those discussions, and we're limited to a 10-year planning horizon, even though your growth now at this point is going to be extensive. So what's in here is just what we anticipate in the early stages, so the first 10 years. But we're limited by service standards, and I think for the most part we've probably utilized the maximum that we could recover.
I'm happy to hear that, and I think we do try to get as much of DC funds as we can, so thank you.
Other questions? Councilor McConkey.
As far as the growth in Elmvale, I know that we're doing a lot to the wastewater. What's the amount of growth that we're expecting in Elmvale for the amount that it's going up?
I had a summary. There's currently there's about 519 units. That's about just under 1,500 people.
Okay. So I'm just thinking out loud, but maybe we have opportunity through our official plan to expand area of development in order to bring down DCs if the wastewater treatment and that could hold it. It's another way of looking at Councillor Ritchie, I was just thinking. The other question I had is, I know that we've talked, and I talked before to you about this, and you probably don't have to highlight in detail, but I just want to make sure that we've considered it, is an operational plan so that in the next 6 years, so we always do our 6-year capital plan, but I'd like to see a 6-year expense plan so that when we know when we have to go to full-time firefighters, or we have to change the expense for the police, and we have to do the other type of planning, I would like to see that type of planning start. And I know that you said that we could DC fund a study to do that, because I know our staff is very limited in resources to do that. So I just want to make sure that was considered.
Through the chair, when you were doing the Midhurst secondary plan, you were going through a fiscal impact assessment. That's where we look at both the capital and what can't be funded through DECs and ends up onto the taxpayer, and then the new operating costs. So you've gone through the first version of that. We've also included here another update, a full-blown fiscal impact, so that's where, for example, I've done Milton since they were 31,000 people, and now we're planning them up to 378,000. So I've been there through the whole gamut. And we did track and we did forecast for fire service is a great example, moving from volunteer or part-time as they call it, and then moving into stations, which will be full-time, and then ultimately they're going to move at 378,000 to full-time complete firefighting. So we've measured that, we've looked at it, and I've got some great historic information, because we've done this for Wichita-Stouffville, for Barrie, for Milton, for Halton Region, for a number of different communities and such. So we can come with some insights, and we can also assist in yeah.
Councillor Austin?
Thank you, Mayor French, through you to our presenter. On page 15, I'm confused because the numbers for net population increase in the two separate charts don't seem to match. So if you take in the top row of both charts, net population increase, one is for 10-year and the other is 13-year. The top one, the net population increase is 16,000, but in the bottom, it's even the Midhurst secondary plan by itself is 18,000. So I'm confused by those numbers. If you could explain them, please.
Well, one is the 10 and the 13-year planning horizon. And then for harder services, quite often, we're using the envelope. Okay? So maybe when we're sizing, well, Midhurst would probably be a great example. If you're sizing pipes and such for this envelope, we're not constrained to any planning horizon quite often. We look at that envelope and say, oh, well, to fully service it, we need all these different pipes, and that translates into a certain size treatment plant for water, a certain size treatment plant. So there may be variations, so quite often those numbers will be larger because we're not constrained to a planning like a time horizon. We're more concerned about, here's the envelope, and this is all the service, these are the lands that have to be serviced, and here's all the pipes that have to go into it.
And actually, to help the answer, if you look at that, there's the two planning horizons for the top chart, but if you look at the line on the lower one, it says full to build out. In other words, there's no timeline in that. 2018 to build out. So that's past 2031. I think that's what you're saying,
Yes,
Mr.
that's correct.
Scanlon? Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah, I think he's talking to this descriptor right here, and that's a better way to put it, it's a larger envelope, and there's more people in it. Yep.
Deputy Mayor Allen?
Thank you, Mayor French. I also thought your report was very well presented. So
Thank you.
if we have until June, until this is passed, I'm sure there are going to be further questions. Do we just get those, email those to you directly? If we,
I think if we pass everything through the treasurer, he coordinates all of the questions and responses.
okay. Thank you.
Okay, I just have a couple ones, and I know I brought this up with Director Schmidt just to confuse the issue. You know, when it comes to our water and wastewater and our user rates, we pool them all. In other words, I'm sure if I analyze the cost of running one of our 43 home water systems, that effectively be a lot more per cubic meter than maybe running Elmville or Midhurst. And my question was a very simple one. Because of what Councillor Ritchie mentioned, you know, we want growth in Elmville. We have services, and yes, they have to be expanded, but the core services are there, and we want to maximize them. And is there any reason, if we chose to, why couldn't we do a smoothing constant somehow of maybe the Midhurst now it's $19? Even the nice thing is, if Midhurst was $1,000, it would have a long-term impact and probably bring back Elmville and around, still the highest, around $4,000. But is there any reason we couldn't do that?
Very good question. We did have discussions in this particular area as we moved through the study. It's a couple of different things. Number one, you've got a number of agreements that are specific to individual developers and individual areas. And some municipalities have those and want to move towards like area specific to municipal wide. What we'd have to do is identify all of the key works, and then to make sure that everybody's got the same works. In certain areas, like even though Midhurst says $19, they're going to build all of the infrastructure for water and wastewater. And so they've agreed with that. That's their agreement. When we take a look at Elmville, we're going to build it, or it's outside of the developer agreement, so we're facilitating it through the development charge. So we almost have to take all those agreements and put everything onto an apple-to-apple comparison. Now, we could still hold Midhurst as one and then try and consolidate the others. But there'd be a bit of an unraveling of some of those agreements, and that's probably one of the areas that was the less easy was the fact that we'd have to enter into negotiations with each of the landowners. We haven't done that at this point. We've continued. If council would like to maybe, pass the bylaw, because your bylaw will die, we can move forward to have further discussions with all the landowners and see what their perspectives are. I'm sure we could probably do that subsequently.
As I said, I just throw it out as an idea.
Yep.
because that is an area we'd like to see full build it, the 500
Yep.
people there and, 300 homes or whatever the case may be. My only second comment was, and I guess it would be our choice, I always think we always want to attract more commercial and industrial. Is there any reason, like, the exemption is 50%? Is there any reason in our bylaw we couldn't say, okay, there's no DCs until 100% increase? Because I know we do it in the other exempt areas, we're doubling, I think in the residential and that. Because that may be an incentive for some of our kind of businesses to grow without incurring, because I just think of something a couple of years ago, all of a sudden the DCs were $100,000 basically on a storage shed, if you want to call it that.
As I noted, Mr. Mayor, these are what we coin as discretionary exemptions. More than happy to work with you on any exemptions that council feel are important to the municipality. The one thing I'd note is if you don't collect here, it just shifts over to the property taxes, and as long as you realize that, then you can have whatever policies you want in that regard.
Thank you. I'll go to council for any final questions. And again, I know the comment was made a couple of times. I guess the first presentation I ever saw from your company and really, really impressed me was in Barrie about 4 years ago. And I was very happy with the report we got. It was easy to read, easy to understand. So congratulate you for giving us information that's easy for us to digest as laymen. And so I do thank you for your presentation this evening. And anyone that's obviously watching or live streaming, if there are any comments on the DC study, please get them in, because it is our plan to adopt a bylaw June 20th. So still open for kind of input on that. Okay, thank you.
Thank
And-
you.
And with that, can I have a mover and a seconder to adjourn this meeting? Coughlin and McConkey? That the public meeting of council held under Section 12 of the Development Charges Act 1997, as amended, is now adjourned at 7:15 PM. All those in favor? Carried. And now we have a deputation by Mr. Mullen of Ainley, and bring us up to date on the Midhurst environmental assessment.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. It's a pleasure also to be here this evening to give you an update. It's been a little while since I've been in front of you with regard to this topic, and so I've got a little presentation here. The purpose of the presentation is obviously, first of all, to give you a little bit of a refresher on where we were in the Midhurst Class EA. So I've got a first couple of slides. We'll sort of talk about the historic part. Then there's a number of key slides whereby we've recently received some comments from the Minister of the Environment, which we've been waiting for. And I'm sort of going to run through those at a pretty high level, trying to give you an overview. And then subsequent to working with your staff over the last week to 10 days, we've got to come up with a little schedule that I'll touch upon at the end, and obviously then open it back up to questions and from yourself as we move from council as we move forward in direction accordingly there. So without further ado, I will move along and basically...
Joe, can I just have you pause, because apparently we're having a little problem with their
Sorry.
streaming, and I'm sure there's some people out there that are quite interested. Carry on, good sir.
Okay, good. We're good to go. So basically, the first slide that I have, Your Worship, is basically the overview of the Class EA process. So this is a typical chart that's produced by the province. I know it can be a little overwhelming a little bit, but on the left-hand side, there's a phase 1 and 2, and it's inside a brown box. That shows the works that were completed in 2008, 2009. When we started up phase 3, we started up here, and we've gone through phase 3 here, including a PIC that I'll talk about a little later. And we're currently right now at the top of phase 4 where this red box and the arrow is. So that's just in the overall planning process. The Class EA process is a regulated document by the province and the Municipal Engineers Association. So we're following that process as we've gone through it over the past a couple of years. The next slide, so the next two slides that I'm going to talk about, or three slides I'm going to talk about, is a little bit of background just for a refresher for yourselves and for anyone else that may be watching in the audience or live on the live stream. So phase 3, I'll start off there, which was sort of the key stages. We had a phase 3 public information centre that was held at Snow Valley in October 2016. That PIC, we presented all the alternatives, all the background documents on the water, wastewater, transportation, along with the recommended solutions for that infrastructure to accommodate the Midhurst secondary plan. At the PIC, we had approximately 160 individuals were signed in, and subsequent to that, during the following 6-week comment period, which basically went to December, we received a total of 67 comments from members of the public, agencies, etc. Those were a combination of emails, letters, etc., some even deputations to yourself here. Following that, in December of 2016, we had a couple of steering committee meetings and a resident liaison group meeting. And as you recall, we basically have a steering committee that is the working team, day-to-day working team associated with the Class EA process. But we also, at the beginning of the process, at your request, which was a great idea, we formed a resident liaison group, which is basically members of the public, whereby we bring them in on our monthly or bi-monthly meetings, whenever they are, and keep them up to speed with the process as we're moving along. So they're informed, and then the idea is that they go back out to the public and spread that word, such that they're not sitting in a vacuum. So we had 2 of those meetings in December and January of 2017. whereby we talked about the comments that were received in the PIC. We then formalized responses. We drafted the responses in conjunction with the steering committee and your staff. We vetted those through both the steering committee and the resident liaison committee, and they were subsequently issued by our office. On February 21st, I came in front of council, give you an update on the Class EA process, including all those review comments that were received, and from what was the draft responses that were proposed going out. The next step in the process, in March of 2017, a special council meeting was held by yourselves whereby you wanted to invite additional comments from the public, further to, first of all, the PIC, further to our responses. By this stage, were now made public and had gone back out to the individuals. And you had received, I believe, 6 formal deputations that night. The information from those deputations was passed along to us, to Ainley that is. We reviewed that information at that time and prepared detailed responses that it has been included in the draft ESR. Around that same time or subsequent to that, we had prepared the draft ESR that had been submitted to the steering committee meeting, and as per MOECC requirements, they had requested that a draft copy of the document be submitted to them prior to it going public. So on April 25th, 2017, we submitted the draft ESR to the MOECC for their peer review of the document. Concurrent with that, Council, signed by the Mayor, sent a letter to MOECC specifically requesting a number of matters be looked at, and a lot of those matters were relating to the earlier deputations that were on the March 8th Council meeting, and specifically asked for the MOE's review of those to make sure that hopefully that the comments were, the background reports were applicable and relevant. So that's sort of a little bit of the background now. So now we spring forward. So in April of 2017, that document was submitted off to the MOECC. And on April 30th, 2018, almost just slightly over a year to the day, so approximately 2 weeks ago, we received comments back from the MOECC. With regard to the draft ESR. And so the next number of slides that I have will give you a high-level overview of those comments that were received. And I'll try and go through them. Obviously, the letter, which I know has been provided to staff and I believe has been circulated, is basically 21 pages, so there is quite extensive comments from the MOECC. I obviously will not get into the details of those all tonight, or we could be here for quite a long period of time, but I welcome getting into those discussions with steering committee members and et cetera, over the coming period of time. But tonight, so for the high-level overview, I'm going to touch upon each of the key issues as identified by the MOECC, or the issues, not even key issues. Obviously, all of them are key issues, so the issues in general. The hydrological assessment, this was one of the key areas I know that was there was some discussion about prior being submitted to MOECC. So the MOE have come back and said the hydrological studies are basically a very good base, and this is using their words, for which to complete further assessments relating to permit to take waters and ECA applications. Those are for future applications, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in a few moments, about what those particular items are and why they're referring to future documents. The Minister also noted in a number of locations throughout the letter, whether related to construction, whether related to water, whether related to wastewater, that further assessments may be required or will be required, and they use both those words in different locations in the future ECA applications and the future permit to take water applications. So the next slide, so the blue text is sort of a overview of what's in the MOECC letter. The black text that you'll see in the next couple of pages is my interpretation. I'm trying to give you an explanation of what those comments mean. So first of all, with regard to the permit to take waters and the ECA, why the MOE or CC are referring to those future applications as opposed to dealing with those assessments now. It is standard during a Class EA process that you'll do a level of detail and a level of assessment with relation to water, with relation to geotechnical, and then in the future, prior to actually construction of any works, that you have to do additional assessments and additional applications and actual formal applications to the MOE. So, for example, for a permit to take water, they are issued by the MOE. All water, wastewater, stormwater, even transportation projects that have an impact on, potential impact on the groundwater must receive a permit to take water from the Ministry of the Environment. the guidelines associated with that requirement is that if you're going to be pumping more than 50,000 litres per day, and that's the MOE's criteria, from the ground either temporarily, so either for 1 or 2 days or for a week or two during construction, or permanently, such as a municipal well, you must receive a permit to take water from the MOECC. So in the case of construction, and they do refer in the letter to construction activities for permit to take water. So for example, if you were doing a construction-related project, to determine if you need a permit to take water, you have to actually do some of the engineering investigations. Yeah, for example, our company would do some of the civil drawings, designs. We would design how deep the storm sewers are going to be, how deep the sanitary sewers are going to be, how deep the water mains are going to be. And then in conjunction with that, we would then retain a sub-consultant, a hydrological consultant or a geotechnical consultant, and both of them are interchangeable, whereby they would do extensive investigations in the field, and including drilling boreholes, etc., prior to determining the need for that permit to take water. A good example might be that if you were installing a shallow storm sewer on a reconstruction road in an area where the groundwater table is not very high, in those areas, the detailed investigations may determine that you don't need to pump excessive amounts of water out of the ground for the construction activities, and therefore the permit may not be required. However, in another area, if you're putting in a deep sanitary sewer that's maybe 5 or 6 meters down, i.e. 20, 30 feet down, more than likely you are going to need a permit. So the detailed investigations will have to be completed. So that's to do with permit to take waters and why the ministry is referring to those in the future, because there is additional works that must be done in the future. With regard to ECAs, a reference in the letter whereby that additional assessments and or investigations or additional reports may be required during the ECAs in the future. Similarly, an ECA is issued by the Minister of the Environment for any water or wastewater or stormwater infrastructure. So if you're putting a pipe in the ground, if you're building a new pumping station, if you're expanding your wastewater treatment plant or building a new one, you must get an ECA from the Minister of the Environment. To get that ECA from the Ministry of the Environment, they require not only preliminary drawings, but they require detailed engineering drawings, detailed hydrological assessments, detailed analysis. For example, if it's a wastewater treatment plant, they require pretty much 60% of the engineering drawings, 60% of all the background reports, and that can be extremely extensive. So that's why that information isn't required until the future. But again, the key points with those two items is that the works cannot proceed until the ministry issue those permits for either for water, wastewater, or even transportation infrastructure in relation to permit to take water. So therefore, in my summary, and I sort of the summary throughout the EA, that's why it's in our position, it's quite common practice for during a Class EA for the ministry to reference you and acknowledge and tell you that, by the way, this is fine, but you may require additional works in the future when we have a permit to take water or an ECA application. And that could be, years down the road for some of this infrastructure, especially when we think of the infrastructure for Midhurst is going to be the infrastructure that's facilitating the entire full build-out, and could be, some of it may not be required. Some of those municipal wells, as an example, may not be recovered 20, 25 years if they're ultimately in the future land. So the applications would be at that point in time. The next, the next question or next comment, one of the key comments with relation to surface water that the ministry note is in relation to, so they've clarified and verified that they've reviewed what they refer to as surface water in relation to all the water and wastewater infrastructure, but they have not related it to or reviewed it in relation to stormwater management. And what that really means is that within these development areas, all of these development areas, each one of them will have to obtain back to that ECA from the Ministry of the Environment for all their stormwater management ponds, their stormwater pipes, etc., etc. So what the Ministry is sort of clarifying here is that any stormwater management infrastructure associated with the Midhurst Secondary Plan is not part of this current review and is obviously not part of this Class EA. So they're clarifying that information will be required in the future, which again, we would classify as common. Moving on to the water supply, so the ministry have again verified that they've reviewed all the background hydrological water information, the assessments, etc., in relation to the proposed 11 new municipal wells. So that's how many wells we're proposing for the full build-out of the Midhurst Secondary Plan, is those 11 municipal wells, and they don't highlight any issues in relation to that review. The minister, in fact, even the minister goes on, and I'll come back to this point a little bit later, the minister goes on to note that they concur with the assessment that there is limited interconnection between deep and shallow aquifers, and they even note that the potential for significant impacts on areas of surface water, i.e. Willow Creek and its tributaries, from the proposed groundwater taking is low. And so those quotes in quotation are directly out of the ministry's letter. And I will come back to that point a little bit later. The next item that the minister have noted is the question, the classification of one of the base flow losses under the full build-out. So within some of the reports we had referenced, there would be approximately 10% base flow or slightly less base flow losses under full build-out of the Midhurst secondary plan in some of the local tributaries. And the ministry have sort of classified that there was, I believe, one location where it said those losses were thereby insignificant. The ministry have said in their words that they do not believe they are insignificant. So what we've come back, and it's actually since this submission in April of 2017 to the MOECC, where there has been ongoing dialogue and discussion with the NVCA. In fact, we had comments from them in the summer of 2017, a meeting with them in October of 2017, and formally issued some comments back to them in early April. So there's been additional analysis done in conjunction with the NVCA, whereby they had some comments and questions with regard to the losses within the creeks. And some of that additional analysis that we have now done, which we will openly share with the Ministry of Environment, is in relation to habitat and temperature within the local creeks. And some of the main, when you get in and looking at this criteria, the classification of significant versus insignificant is actually in relation to, will there be habitat impact, will there be temperature impact, versus no impact. So when we look at this additional information, which the MOE did not have as part of their initial review, it's an additional letter and some technical memorandums. We would be classifying that these losses are obviously are very low. They're low, less than 10%, and they do not. The key point is they do not have any impact on habitat and/or temperatures within the local creeks. The ministry also notes that they disagree with the comment in the documents that a 20%, up to a 20%, so that's not that we have 20%. In the documents we reference material that we said that up to 20% groundwater losses or base flow losses would be considered acceptable, and the ministry said they don't agree with that terminology. So what we can provide to them actually comes out of two provincial related documents. First of all, there's an MNR/MOE document produced in 2011, and I've put in quotations some of the quotations right out of that document. For cold water streams, an unacceptable impact is defined by circumstances where groundwater discharge is reduced by more than 20%. So that's not our words, that's from that MOE/MNR 2011 document. Also, there's a Department of Fisheries, or DFO, document that we referenced in 2013, whereby flow alterations less than 10% of the instantaneous flow have a low probability of detectable impacts to the ecosystems that support commercial, recreational, or aboriginal fisheries, etc. So basically we were referencing those two documents in our classification of the 20%, so we can obviously provide and clarify that to the ministry. With regard to wastewater servicing, now the ministry confirms, first of all, they run through a number of the key steps on the wastewater side. So they confirm, first of all, that the 7Q20 analysis that we've completed for the Willow Creek, and we've determined through the background analysis of 10 years worth of data that 7Q20 flow is 430 litres per second. The ministry have confirmed that they have no issues with that value. The minister have also provided a number of comments, and there's a few little comments in the letter with regard to some of the effluent quality targets coming out of the wastewater treatment plant in relation to total suspended solids, i.e. TSS, E. coli, TAN, and BODs. So we've looked at those comments, and we have no issues with some of their comments, with any of their comments actually, and can update the applicable sections of the background reports and the ESR to comply with the comments. The ministry also again note, and this is sort of one of those locations whereby they note that they will wish to have further dialogue with the municipality or with the proponent at the time of the ECA stage. So we've noted, or we are noting, that we've got first of all, no comments with their comments, and would obviously openly look forward to that future dialogue with the ministry. And it is quite common that prior to actually doing a design or a construction of a facility, such as a sewage plant, pumping station, etc., that one of the first things you do is have a consultation meeting with the Ministry of the Environment. So that's sort of them again putting it on record that they want to be involved, and we would obviously welcome that. The Ministry have also provided, and so this is some of the key components on the wastewater side, the Ministry have also provided some comments on the phosphorus targets that we have identified in the background study. So if you remember right, we had identified a 0.03 milligrams per litre for ultimate and a 0.05 milligrams per litre for phase 1, that being the objectives that we must achieve with the coming out of the wastewater treatment plant. The Ministry have confirmed that they have no objection to those numbers. And then as a precautionary member, they have suggested that they would like to have some dialogue with us in the future about adding a monthly loading limit during the ECA stage. Again, we have no issues with, first of all, they confirm our numbers that we have, so we like that. And we've obviously got no issues whatsoever with a loading limit. It provides some flexibility to the municipality in the day-to-day operations of a sewage plant. And we would obviously therefore welcome those future discussions regarding those limits at the ECA stage in the future. The Minister concur, and another key point here is that they concur that the wastewater effluent will not, and I've put in quotations, will not have an impact on temperature and or the water quality of Willow Creek and the downstream menacing wetlands. I know that was a very key issue for a number of interested parties, and again, right now in the Ministry's letter, they are confirming that they believe there will be no impact to those, both from a temperature and from a water quality perspective. The next point on wastewater is the Ministry notes that the total phosphorus load discharge, and this is actually a very, very key point, and I'll try and get into it a little bit more detail, that they've analysed the load that's in their reports that's coming from the wastewater treatment plant, and their words were that it would be a very small fraction of the total load that's currently being discharged into the downstream system, and they actually reference the menacing wetland, and therefore unlikely to be of any concern. The Ministry even further go on is that, if you recall, back as part of the minutes of settlement with the NVCA and the developers group, there was a net zero phosphorus requirement. So we've built into the ESR that had been submitted to the MOE that in conjunction with the Ministry of Environment, we would work with them excuse me, to obtain that net zero phosphorus loading, and that would be then generally controlled through the ECA that's issued for the wastewater treatment plant. The Ministry are basically saying here through these two comments that in their opinion there is no need for that. The loads are small, and those are using their words, and as such they are not wishing to be including a phosphorus offsetting load within the MOE's ECA. Now, to further that on, and there may be a question, I would propose that obviously that is a draft plan condition, it's obviously a draft plan condition, but it's also a minutes of settlement condition between NVCA and the developers group. What we are proposing is that we carry on with that condition. What this Ministry comment is basically saying that, thank you very much, you're very welcome to carry on with that, but we don't want to be any part of it, if I may sort of paraphrase. But we are proposing, and I can talk about that later, but next steps, or if there's a question, about that we would carry on with that condition such that it still stays in the ESR, such that you end up, and then you work with the NVCA, you work with yourselves, and you work with the development community who are up, I have not heard otherwise, who are very open to working towards that net zero increase. So although the Ministry are saying they don't think it's necessary and they don't want to be involved, that does not mean you can't choose that, and the NVCA choose that we should carry on with that. So that would be our perspective in looking at that. The final then issue on what the MOE had on, they had a number of comments relating to air quality coming out of the pump stations, coming out of the treatment plant, coming out of some of the small, even they talked about sewers, etc. So they've got a number of comments, 8 or 10 or maybe even 12, 13 comments. We've reviewed those in detail with our sub-consultant and have absolutely no issues with them whatsoever. They're really minor, relatively minor issues, and our sub-consultant is already working on updating the reports to comply with those comments. So that's from a air quality perspective, sorry. The last comment they had was relation to transportation, and again this sort of ties back into some of my earlier comments, but they note that, and these are some of the words directly out of the MOE's letter, is that although it may be too early to develop detailed drainage and stormwater plans for the roads, the EA should clearly identify and stipulate what kind of swim facilities and what type of mechanisms would be put in place to ensure that the new or expanded roads comply with all of that low phosphorus and low impact developments that we're proposing on the development areas. And so obviously we have no issues with that. In fact, those were some of the discussions that we've had in the past, even with the steering committee meeting, for example, that when we look at reconstructing some of these roads, A prime example might be St. Vincent Street coming into the city of Barrie. It would not be a sort of an urban jungle. It would be with open ditches. It would be minimizing. It would be low impact development and maintaining that such that we're obtaining those features of the low impact development. So we have no problem with the comment, and we can and easily, quite easily, add those details and features into the ESR, into the transportation section of the ESR in response to the comments from the MOECC. So in essence, in closing for the MOE comments, I believe, or we believe, they are actually very, very supportive of the overall ESR. Obviously, they've got a number of comments, but that's to be expected with a 2,000-page document and given the sensitivity and the magnitude of the area. But we have overall feel that we can review the comments, update the comments, address their comments, and all relatively in an easy time frame, because a lot of their comments, as I mentioned, are dealing with ECAs and permit to take water, which are future processes and future applications down the road. So that sort of closes out the review on the MOECC comments. The next couple of slides I just wanted to run through was sort of the next steps. We developed this in conjunction with your staff. So what would be proposed is that the notice of completion for the environmental study report could be published in late May and early June, and along with on the township website. We would host steering committee meetings and resident liaison committee meetings in June 12th. At that point in time, we would have more details and right into the nuts and bolts of that MOECC letter, how we've updated the ESR, etc. Then the filing of the environmental study report could be made available on June 13th, which it would initiate the formal 30-day public review period and associated with the Class EA. We would also, at your request, which we believe is a great idea, although it's not a standard requirement, we would host a public open house on June 18th at Snow Valley, similar to what we did back in October 2016 in relation to the document. So we would sort of provide the purpose of that would be to assist people in getting up to speed with the ESR, so they don't have to review those 2,000 pages that I talk about. We would present that highlighted information to them and help them get up to speed such that if they have questions, comments, etc., then they could move forward with that. During the 30-day public review period, if comments are received, we would obviously review those, work with the individuals and or groups. But if comments cannot be resolved, the individuals or parties can request the Ministry of the Environment for a Part 2 order. That's the old sort of used to be referred to as a bump up. So that option is available during the 30-day review period for anyone that feels that their issues are not being addressed. In conjunction with doing that, they have to provide details to the ministry of why they believe a Part 2 order is required. So they don't just say, I want a Part 2 order. They have to provide specifics on that. If no Part 2 orders were received, the Class EA process would be completed on July 13th. If a Part 2 order is received during that 30-day period, the MOECC take control of the entire process. They will then conduct a comprehensive review, first of the Part 2 order requests, of the final ESR, and they become basically in the driver's seat. At some point subsequent to their comprehensive review, they would issue a minister's decision in relation to the Part 2 order that is binding upon all parties, whether it be the requester of the Part 2 order and or the municipality. So that decision of the minister is binding and would resolve it. It could be a combination of any matters of conditions, additional studies, etc., etc., etc. But that decision in response to a Part 2 order would be binding upon all parties. So that, Your Worship, concludes my presentation, and if there's any questions, which I'm sure there are, I'd be more than happy to try and answer them.
I think there might be a few. Just before we go into the actual questions, I guess one of the concerns, even looked at some of the proposed timetable on this. We're talking about having an open house, but to me, it would make a lot more sense that that be conducted before we issue notice of completion, because there might be more input on that, but we can go down that road when we get to it. For now, I'll just turn to council, because I'm not sure what the mechanism is for us to really kind of get down into the nitty-gritty. That's why I really question, and I raised it with our CAO today. Should we have a separate kind of information meeting with you and council now that we've had an opportunity to kind of review all this? So I guess we could ask as many questions as we wanted to without tying up the rest of the audience for other business matters. There seems to be something missing, I mean, would be my comment, but for the time being, let's see what questions council does have, and I'll just go to Councilor Hannah.
French, Joe, for clarification for people at home that would want to know, what is the last date they can submit a request for a bump up?
Your worship, through to Councillor Hannah, basically during that, the last, right on the 30th day. So using my dates that I had on the projection there, it would be that July 13th date. So basically, during that 30-day period, you can submit a Part 2 order request, whether it be day 1 or day 30 at 5 p.m.
July 13th.
Yeah, using these dates, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Councilor Ritchie.
Thank you, Mayor French, through to Joel. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
We've been a year in the process, and it's finally coming to fruition. So, but it's a process. We're moving through it, and we'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you for coming.
Deputy Mayor Allen.
Thank you, through you, my French. Thanks, Joe. For the PTTW and ECAs, the letter suggests that there will be much more testing and more information in certain areas required. Who retains the consultants for those exercises? Who determines the required work? Who receives the reports and approves them? And to what extent would staff and council's involvement be for each of these reviews, and as far as an approval process,
Sure.
if we delay this further information further down the road?
Sure. Your worship, through to Deputy Mayor Allen, very good question, and I'll try and step you through all the pieces. And maybe if I can give an example type project and sort of use that as an example. First of all, if you were going to build a pumping station that was facilitating one of these portions of development, it doesn't matter where it is, in that scenario, that specific scenario, the detailed designs and detailed hydrological work would be done by the developer's consultant. All of that information, as per all of your developments, is submitted to the township for detailed review and detailed approval. So that would be step one, that the designs, the drawings, the hydrological investigations, the assessment of the groundwater, etc., would be submitted first of all to township. The township then, through the normal process, at least in historical, would retain our office to do peer reviews. Even in situations, and I'll give an example using that similar example, hydrological assessments, which is not our expertise, we're civil consultants. In that scenario, the township could and quite, I wouldn't say commonly, occasionally does, retain an expert opinion for peer review of that. So there's, first of all, be prepared by the developer's consultant. It would be submitted to the municipality for peer review, all of the documents, and you could bring in experts of your own at that point in time. You then work with the developer's consultants to you get it to a position where the municipality is in agreement with it. Then the municipality, basically before an ECA or a permit to take water can be obtained from the ministry, an application has to go in as part of that. So in addition to all these documents, there's an actual form and an application. That form and application actually has to be signed by your Director of Public Works or one of your senior representatives. So we would go back and forth and with your township staff and with the developer's consultants to get all the documents to a level of satisfactory before signing it. And then that documentation would all then go off to Toronto, to the approvals branch, and then, or the permit to take water branch, depending on which section it is, and then they would do their comprehensive and detailed review of that material. And again, it's quite common, or has been occasion, whereby the ministry have come back and had looked for additional information, looked for additional reports. In fact, even in one case, and I won't mention any names, there was even one case whereby the ministry submitted the application back and said additional work needed to be done, that it wasn't, that they needed additional work. So there's it is a multi-step process. So that's in, when I say, if I may, in that scenario whereby the developer is the proponent of the infrastructure. On another piece of work, such as a road reconstruction, whereby you might be the proponent of the work, you would retain your own consultants, whether that be Ainley or whether it be Company X. Those consultants would then prepare that hydrological assessments, detailed evaluations, etc. That would again be submitted through to staff. Staff again, in conjunction with that consultant, When they're happy, that package will be compiled, the application is signed, and the information go off to the Ministry of Environment. So what all those, and those are sort of two extreme scenarios, maybe not extreme, two different types of scenarios whereby one you're the proponent and the other the developer's proponent. In both of those scenarios, the municipality and particularly your staff are intimately involved in the review and approval of the documentation. So therefore, I would sort of say that in an extension of that, council is involved whether with that process. They obviously may not be involved in the day-to-day, but you have that review and approval that of that documentation. So hopefully that long-winded answer maybe clarifies it.
Follow on, if I may. No, that's a good example and good clarification. So what would be the timing of and the frequency of the different PTTW and ECA requests? So what I'm hearing you say is that at those points in time, there will be opportunity for the potential of further peer review, whether it be through your firm or through another expertise,
Correct.
that the township, the council could determine whether they wanted
Sure.
to have involved. There would be that review process and approval process before it went back to the MOECC as part of the PTTW and ECA. So my
Correct.
question is, what is the timing of those and the frequency of those down the road?
Another good sort of follow-up question. The timing is really related or is driven by the infrastructure. Obviously, we've got to meet our second plan that, shall we say, at 0 right now. At 100 is full build-out of the second plan. We know that's in the 2040s and maybe beyond. So infrastructure, as it's required over the next 20 to 25 years, whether it be a pumping station, whether it be a road upgrade, whether it be an expansion to a sewage plant, or whether it be a new water pumping, a new water reservoir, each of those components, as they develop and propose go along, will require either an ECA or a permit to take water, or usually both. And keeping in mind the staging and development, we have as part of the, I wasn't involved, but as part of the most recent, even though it's a couple of years ago now, Ontario Municipal Board hearing, there is a draft plan showing the staging of the development. So as each of those little pods and phases of development come along, there would be ECA and permit to take water applications necessary for the development of that infrastructure there. So it's almost a continuation. I don't mean to say a continuation, but there may be new permit to take waters and new ECAs required every year or every couple of years for pieces of infrastructure, whether it be a road, whether it be a stormwater management pond, whether it be a sewage pumping station, or whether it be a treatment plant, or even ultimately a treatment plant expansion. The benefit of that process is that as those processes move along, the documentation that has been obtained and developed, whether it be on the groundwater, whether it be on the infrastructure, whether it be on the soils, is always getting added to. And obviously, if there at any point in time there was red flags, and that's part of the process, whether it be from impact to local private wells, that would be a process that all of a sudden you haven't approved all of 8,233 lots or whatever numbers in the MSP. You're doing it in pods and sections. So as you do each of these applications, or the proponents, which are all being reviewed by the town and your consultants, every time there will be an ample opportunity for, okay guys, we need to reevaluate.
So if there is a red flag that arises in that process as part of this process, how is the red flag and the disagreement, how is it resolved and by which parties?
Well, the first thing is if there's a red flag, and whether it be raised either by the municipality and or the MOECC, there's usually, well, I wouldn't say not usually, there's not a permit to take water or an ECA application approved. So if they're not approved, the construction's not happening. So if there's a disagreement, and there was one recent example of this, that again, I don't want to name names, whereby the ECA application was submitted in, but it got returned to the municipality for additional information to be provided by the proponent and his consultant. So at that point in time, if there's no permit or no application approved, there's no construction. I mean, if construction proceeds without an ECA, that is an extremely enforceable offence. The MOECC, through the local district office in Barrie, will definitely lay charges. If a permit to take water is not obtained and someone's pumping excessive amounts of water out of the ground, again, that is something that the ministry look very seriously upon and would lay charges against the proponent, i.e. if it's a developer, if it's whoever it is. So there is those mechanisms as you go through the process, that if there are red flags shall say that then the permits would get withheld, and being those ECA and those PW permit to take water permits, which are MOE's control, they are the holder of those. You can't issue those, you can't request those. They basically say yes or no.
Other questions? Okay, actually, I'll make some comment, then I'll come back to you. And maybe I'll just kind of, I don't want to get into the kind of the real technical stuff. I have a whole bunch of questions, but that's why we don't seem to have a really good mechanism for that as council to ask those questions, and I'm not sure how that can be worked into the schedule. I do have a couple of specific questions, though. When we see the response from the MOECC, 21 pages on 2000, is that would you consider that a detailed response, or that somebody sat on it for a year and fired something out?
No, I think, Your Worship, through to you, and in response to that, I think it is a very detailed review. In fact, it's probably one of the most comprehensive and detailed reviews I've seen the MOE complete in a number of years, and we've done two extremely sensitive ones, both on Lake Simcoe in Innisfil and in Bradford, relating to wastewater treatment being discharged into Lake Simcoe, and we did not get this kind of a comprehensive review. So, I mean, I believe it was a comprehensive review, yes. I can't comment, obviously, on the timeline, but the comprehensiveness, yeah, I can.
So maybe I'll just go back to the timeline. My concern is, when can we kind of get down to the nitty-gritty and ask questions about, like simple things like, okay, the phosphorus percentage in the net zero MVCA, how's that going to impact us? Some of the changes in the kind of the normal flow and what the impacts are, and possibly even express some concern about the depth of analysis. And so how can we do that as a council? Because we're the ones charged.
I mean,
at
I
some
would
point.
look to your staff, but I'm definitely, and I obviously haven't talked to Robert about this, and I apologize for doing so. I'm more than welcome to receive questions, emails, letters from yourselves that I will try and, that I will obviously review and respond and provide those comments back to you. And, and I can feel free to provide those to me tonight, tomorrow, at your will. I mean, if you want to do it through Robert or do it through me directly, I'm obviously here at your disposal to answer any questions that you may have, and trying to assist you so I would make myself available, and obviously all of my sub-consultants and or my staff similarly to provide those answers.
I'm not sure it still answers, or kind of, I'll go to Robert first, maybe he has some helpful hints.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, because I think your concern also was potentially to have the public involved. I have an idea. I just want to look at the timetable to see how we can try to make it work, even to the point where even our open house might be extended, where we actually have council sit as part of that open house and take questions. So I actually have an email drafted for Mr. Mullen that'll send him so his phone doesn't go off while he's presenting, and look at how we can make something happen because of our discussion earlier today.
Okay, I guess as a follow-up on that, because I don't want to beat this to death, but I'd still prefer that occur before we issue a notice of completion. That's my concern. Issuing the notice of completion before we have healthy debate or discussion on it. I really question, are we being as transparent as we have been all the way through it? So I don't know how that mechanism would work out. Because the other concern I have, and the only concern, is, and I know we have agreement with kind of the development community that we're not going to wander into the summer period with the public, the open houses and PICs and that. The only concern I have is that even by this timetable, even if we switched around the June 13th and the June 18th or whatever, I am concerned that the comment period wanders into when a lot of people are away, and some of the people that may want to do a bump up or whatever may not be as engaged as they should. I have no concern about the comments or whatever, lots of questions, but it's almost like we're moving this really fast now because it took the MOEC so long to comment, and we have no control of them. And I just don't want to see us move forward at a lightning speed for the sake of moving forward at a lightning speed. I know this whole proposal's been around for 8 or 10 years and all that, but at the same time, as I said before, this is the most dramatic change that we're inviting into the township of Springwater ever, and I do believe it needs a little more consideration. We're not talking about adding a few homes in Elmville or a few homes in Ant Mill or another 100 homes in Stone Manor Woods or another couple homes 100 homes in Snow Valley. We're talking about building a new city that's going to have a dramatic impact. So how can we at least feel comfortable after the exercise and the shovels go in the ground that we've actually done everything possible to take care of the well-being of those 20,000 people that we do have exist. So how can we do that? I just want someone to tell me how we can do that. I'm getting no answer, so I'll go to Councillor McConkey.
I further have some questions on the schedule, and I guess we look at the update of the environmental study report, ESR, to address the comments. So to me, that is when you'll be working with all of the comments and revising based on the information that you have and working with them, but we have no date for that. And yet you're coming forward with the EA Steering Committee on June the 12th, and then on June the 12th again with the liaison, and then you're saying it's with the revised ESR. Well, I want to know when I'm going to have that document, because also if you're coming with me for the first review of the revised ESR on June 12th, and then you're going for notice of completion the very next night. What if I find something on June 12th? Like usually you have 48 hours or 24 hours in a private sector to, and I think usually public's slower, but this is going at a rapid pace. So I think we need some reasonableness here if we're not allowing for any error for yourself and for us for any input. And it can be from our side, the developer, or anybody. So, that means you have to be right on target. And I have no date for when you plan to be right on target. So at least if you can give me a date, and I know I can get back with the feedback before my meetings, but I need a date before the June 12th that you will have it revised.
Your Worship, through to Councillor McConkey, I'll try to answer the question. I mean, the key thing that will be changing from the draft ESR that was submitted 1 year ago is basically anything that's in that letter, and a majority of the MOECC letter, that is, and a large majority of those items don't require any changes to the ESR. So in essence, and with all due respect, the changes to the ESR are actually very, very nominal. I mean, there are obviously some additional background updates, clarification of some numbers, revision of some numbers, and providing some additional clarification. But those 2,000 pages, there's really nominal changes because of the comments, and the majority of the comments, when you go through them in detail, are either relating to that they concur and or that they will revise or reserve judgment until that ECA and permit to take water stage in the future. So we do not foresee, and that's why we are sort of relatively confident with this schedule, that are confident that there is no major changes to the environmental study report.
Add on to that, if it's so little, then I'd like to propose that the date be completed this Friday. Or let's talk a date. If it's supposed to be that easy, then all I'm asking for is a date.
Your Worship, I can obviously listen to what Councillor McConkey says. I work with your CEO with regard to timelines, but keeping in mind, I mean, we can set earlier dates. We can set timelines for revising the letter, but basically what I would be proposing is that there would be a detailed, comprehensive letter with detailed responses that would be coming back out to the steering committee meeting, and then the revisions would already been included in the ESR. So,
sorry, I can't accept that. Like, if I have to be prepared to go into a meeting and come out the next day and go to the public, I either have to know when that document's going to be prepared in advance so that I can give my comments in advance of June 12th, or you give us time after the June 12th to look at the revisions. All I'm asking for, and you're saying it's easy, is when will you complete all the revisions that are going to be on the table for us? Is it June 12th? Because if it's June 12th, that's too late, especially when you say it's easy.
Your Worship, we can, through Councillor McConkey, we can work with your CEO with regard to the dates and then see what we can come up with.
Yeah. Actually, what I was going to suggest is maybe take all the comments tonight and maybe you and the CAO come back with, I don't want to kind of rubber stamp this schedule right at the moment. That's the only part of the presentation I'm not comfortable with. I know we're receiving your report, but I want to make sure we're not necessarily confirming the dates you put forward. They might be moved around a little bit. And again, we'll take the expert input and that from obviously both of you. And with that, Deputy Mayor Allen.
Thank you, through you, Mayor French. With respect to water supply, the MOECC in their response looked at the studies and the modeling and say that prediction results could change significantly by altering the model input parameters. My understanding is that that your response to that was that the Kempenfeld model that was used, Kempenfeld Bay model that was used, provides adequate predictions and projections for water supply. That seems to be juxtaposed to what the MOECC is saying. So how do you reconcile going forward with that without further testing at this point in time?
A couple of comments, Your Worship, through to Deputy Mayor Allen, and then that's a very good question. Basically, there's a couple of items. First of all, there has been, first of all, it is a standard to use a regional type model. It is an industry standard in Ontario to use a regional model for these type of analysis. Further to that, when the South, North Simcoe, etc., groundwater analysis was done in 2015, which the MOE approved, and they were one of the ones at the table. They used the Berry Tier 3 water level model, and that model was predicting base flow losses. That model is actually an extension of the model, the Kempenfeld model that we're currently using, our sub-consultants are using. So there's those clarifications. Also, the Kempenfeld model that we're using here has been updated and has been refined over the last number of years based upon actual monitoring data in the field, which again is uncommon for a regional model of that scale. It's not common that you go out and do detailed monitoring and then gauging it and verifying the model. And then the other comment that I would sort of lean to and clarify with the MOE is that, and I touched upon this in one of my slides, and the MOE quotes the potential for significant effects of the area surface waters being Willow Creek and its tributaries and the menacing wetland from the proposed groundwater taking is low. And that was their conclusion. So again, they're concluding in that section of the document. So I would obviously want to have that dialogue with them, and we will have that dialogue, provide the clarification on the model that it's not a standard regional model that we have used. It's a standard regional model that's been further refined over the past number of years. And it's also a spin-off of the model that they used, the MOECC that is, in 2015 when they approved the North Simcoe and South Georgian Bay water model. So that will be our response, and we actually are quite confident that they will accept that to that effect.
Well, wouldn't the MOECC be totally familiar with the Kempenfeld model and how it has been used recently? So aren't they basically saying that you can vary input in a model to get different sorts of results? So the alternative is to actually test the actual water supply and not use a model. Is that not correct?
Well, Your Worship, through to Deputy Mayor Allen again, in essence they're referring to a regional model. Usually in a regional model there's very little calibration done. So in other words, you don't go out and test as you refer to. This actual Kempenfeld model, there was extensive calibration done whereby we did go out, or our sub-consultants did go out and actually take stream flows whilst they were pumping at location X and location Y, and did that to calibrate the model so when we pump over here, what's the impact over here? And we did see some minor variations, and that was some of the calculations and they used to calibrate the model. So again, that's not standard or not common when you do a regional model. It's usually more of a desktop, and you look at an area the size of this regional model, which deals from Manton Mills in the north to Berry in the south and east and west to that same kind of magnitude. So in this area, in the specifics, the model was calibrated, and again, more than a standard regional model would be. And again, the ministry actually did use it. Now, with regard to why the ministry are not sort of being familiar with that, obviously there is a number of reviews and a number of departments within the Ministry of the Environment, so I can only attest that maybe in this particular case, the reviewer of these comments was maybe not familiar with the Kempenfelt model. Obviously, these reviewers are looking at the whole entire province of Ontario, so they may not know the specifics of the Kempenfelt model. Which are very, in the big picture, a very, very small model. So, but we would be open and are open to having that dialogue with the ministry, and are confident that we can satisfy that requirement.
Any other questions? Because we are, okay. Deputy Mayor Allen?
The last item with respect to the P-budget assessment. So you're saying that the ministry basically said they're satisfied with it, and there doesn't have to be offset. We're saying that we'd like to maintain that as a condition. What's involved with the monitoring of that in future?
Sure. Yeah,
in the way of actual work and
Sorry.
estimated cost? And
Your Worship, through to Deputy Mayor Allen, first of all, you're correct that the ministry are saying that they do not wish or don't feel it's necessary, and therefore wouldn't be making a condition of the ECA permit. For example, in a scenario where they did find it necessary in the town of New Tecumseh, there's only been literally 3 or 4 of these across the entire province. One of them is in town of New Tecumseh, where they did put in stipulations in the ECA for the sewage plant expansion in Tottenham to do those phosphorus offsets. So in this scenario, they're saying they're nominal, and therefore they don't feel it's necessary, so they're out in essence. As I noted earlier, we would still propose to keep that condition in the environmental study report, that there is that requirement that as we move forward with the development community, or the development community moves forward with you, that there is a requirement to achieve that net zero. So what would be done? I mean, there has been extensive work done to calculate what the net load is. We know that in the SR, that it's in the order, and in fact that's why the ministry are making the comment of the low numbers. It's in the order of 33 kilograms ultimately, and if my memory serves me right, 64 kilograms in phase 1 annual load. So that detailed analysis has been done, so it would be a matter of, as we move forward with phase 1 or even sub-phases, that analysis would then get drilled down and further analysed using the same consultants. In that particular case, we did bring in an expert, exterior expert, the township did, to peer review that information. Again, we would continue to do that in the future. With regard to all the costs, to date those costs, or those costs, no similar to any other development cost, would be borne by the development. Calculating that, the key area is going to be coming down to, and the NVCA and yourselves will have to have the discussions of sort of who then, first of all, what measures do you take? You know, how do you offset a load of 30 kilograms per year? Do we take some septics offline emitters? Do we put in some stormwater ponds downstream on the Minising to gather some of that suspended solids, which is where the key phosphorus load's coming from, and those mechanisms, and then who's going to be the, shall we say, the controller of that? And I know in some other areas of the province, the Conservation Authority have been done that, and that's over in South Nation, just south of Ottawa. So the Conservation Authority have been the policer of that, if you shall say. But so those are still discussions you would have to have. But in our perspective, that would become no different than some of the draft plan conditions that you have today with these development communities or developments, that there's another condition that as the development proceeds, or as a phase stage or otherwise of development proceeds, there have to be a plan put in place in accordance with X, Y, and Z to the satisfaction of the township and the Conservation Authority that achieves that net zero. And that could be any combination of storm ponds, septics offline, etc.
Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mayor French. Not related to this topic, so if this is a follow-up, please continue. All right. Through you, Mayor French. My question would go back to the template that's set out for us. Agreeing with Councillor McConkey that I myself, not being part of a steering committee or the other groups that are involved, to have that information provided to all of council when it is made available to those groups, like we were saying, a few days before they meet with the group. And then again, time from the second, I guess the second draft's going to be presented to the groups, and then a third draft would then be on the website. And again, to have some time before that goes to the website, because we do get questions from residents. So to have that information and to be able to have answers available would be great.
Sure. Your Worship, through to Councillor Coghlan, the earlier comment was heard loud and clear, and I will work with the CEO to make sure we can try and accommodate those requests.
Deputy Mayor Allen?
Thank you, Mayor French. Part 2 orders, can you give us an example? How frequent are they? What would be an example of an initiation? What would be the likelihood of it being accepted by the MOECC? What's the time frame?
Sure. Again, very good question, Your Worship, through to Deputy Mayor Allen. First of all, Part 2 orders, I've never seen one get refused. I've seen them getting dealt with relatively quickly, so the more comprehensive, the more detailed. If someone submits a Part 2 order request that they don't like it because their house is going to be impacted, the ministry will accept that and will go through the regulatory process, but they might do it in a more expeditious manner because of, and not to say that's a frivolous request, but it's not as significant. Whereas if someone else submits details on X, Y, and a Z, then the ministry will obviously, they will look at them all, and I'm not trying to say they put different classifications into it, but the more details that go into the ministry in the Part 2 order, obviously the more comprehensive the review can be from the ministry. Or they may do follow-up questions. When the ministry take over the process, they may come back to you, i.e. us, and say we want X, Y, and a Z from you and your consultants, or they may go back to the proponent and say we want X, Y, and a Z from you before we'll consider this. They set timelines for that. Usually at the beginning the timelines are relatively quickly. They want that additional information, i.e. within a few weeks. With regard to the entire process of a Part 2 order, so first of all, I've never seen them get refused. The more comprehensive the information, the better from the proponents. And with regard to the timelines, the quickest I've ever seen one get resolved, and then this is over the last 20 years, was actually just in the last few months, and you may even be aware of it. It's a county road project. There was a Part 2 order submitted in December, and we received the minister's decision in April. So basically a 4-month turnaround time, which again, that's the quickest I've ever seen them dealt with. More standard or more expectation or some, I would say 6 months to a year, and maybe even pushing the ladder would be a typical time frame.
Good. Okay, I think you have enough input from us to work on a timetable and come forward. I just want to make sure we're moving along at a pace. I mean, there's good information here, good studies. Yes, the MOECC doesn't seem to have any real red light issues, I guess we'd call it. A couple of yellow ones, and it's up to, the proponent or us to kind of provide the information and move forward. So with that, can I have a mover and a seconder to accept the presentation? That's all we're doing. Hannah and Coghlan. That the presentation from Jay Mullen of Ainley Group be received. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Now minutes. Can I have a mover and a seconder to get this on the table, 7.2 to 7.5, McConkey and Austin. And that the minutes of council items 7.2 through to 7.5 be approved as presented. Any of these you'd like to pull? Deputy Mayor Allen?
Yes, the first one, I just noticed there was a typo.
Okay, the minutes, 7.2 of the April 18th.
Maybe I have to find it again, but
Okay, that will be corrected. Any other comments in the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. And now, to get it on the table, the minutes of boards and committees and other organizations, items 7.7 to 7.10, Coghlan and Austin. And we'll be receiving as information. Any of those you would like to pull for discussion or comment? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. And now we're into question period. Anybody in the public that has a question preferably something on the agenda, but we'll certainly address any questions as best we can. Just come forward, give your name and address, pose your questions, and we'll see what kind of answer we can provide to you. Okay, seeing none, we shall move on to 9.1. And if I can get it on the table. A mover and a second, and this is the recommendation from Finance and Audit, Hannah and Coghlan. That the recommendation from the Finance and Audit Committee containing items 9.2 through to 9.6 be approved as presented. So open for discussion. Councillor Ritchie.
Mayor French, I was wanting to pull 9-2, or talk about it.
Okay, thank you. Any of the other ones? Councillor Coghlan?
9.6,
9.6.
9.4, 9.3.
Okay, I guess we'll address them each as we go then. Are there comments or questions? We'll start with 9.2. I think that was Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Mayor French, to the Director of Finance. Excellent information on all of them as far as that, but I'm just using this one to pull this to, in addition to the information, I'd like to know what the taxes were for 210 to 214. If you could bring that forward at another meeting. And I'd like to know what the legal costs were for 210 to 214 as well, too. Bring that forward as well, too. Thank you.
Is that clear enough direction? And I guess we'll kind of provide a motion to do that. And that's not a concern or something, okay, great. Okay, first of all, we'll deal with the, okay, do you want to comment?
Yes, please.
Okay. I think we're going to do the overall covering where we're going to discuss them each individually. That's what this motion is. So it was moved by Hannah and Coghlan, the recommendation from the Finance and Audit Committee containing items 9.2 through to 9.6 be approved as presented with the exception of item 9.2, 9.3, 9.4, and 9.6 to be dealt with separately. And that's assuming that 9.5 is okay as published, or does someone want to pull that one also? Councillor Coghlan?
Thank you, Mayor French. My apologies. I thought that we were having an opportunity just to speak to some of them. I do have, they're simple questions, but 9.5, I do have a couple of questions just about Ant Mills.
We'll just add 9.5 and deal with them each individually. Madam Clerk, just add 9.5. So we're not really serious. Okay, the resolution, I just want to check with the mover and the seconder if it's still okay that recommendations from the Finance and Audit Committee be separated for discussion. Is that okay with the mover and seconder? Okay, all those in favor? Carried. So now we will deal with them in order. 9.2, and we've already got some comment on that. Is, I think Deputy Mayor Allen had further comment on 9.2?
Yes, just to clarify, Councillor Ritchie asked about audit fees and legal fees. I would ask, Director Schmidt did an analysis of the components, and that was helpful, so I would ask that the detail be on the same sort of component level for the legal fees, because I think that's information that will be important for all of us to see.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion on 9.2? We'll prepare a resolution to deal with that. Okay, can I have a mover and a seconder to get the recommendations that are being suggested on the table? Coughlin and Allen? Question?
Thank you, Mayor French. And further to Councillor Ritchie's request, I recall a report that's already completed as that. Have we not received something in the last, I'm going to say year, with all that information being requested? We received that at the end. It was before budget time where we asked for a breakdown on legal expenses, and you had yourself gone back as far as, I believe, 2007 or 8 in that information. So maybe it's just as simple as resending that information.
Director Schmidt, do you want to comment? I don't think it covered that long of a period.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coughlin, I believe there was actually a notice of motion by the Deputy Mayor back in 2017 that requested legal fees, the detailed legal fee breakdown for, I believe, 2013 to 2016, which we do have. And we can provide further information for 2017 to complete that. And if council so wishes to go prior to 2013, we can do that as well. It just might take a little bit more time, but we can definitely provide that.
Councilor Ritchie, what was the time frame you were requesting? Because I just heard something different, just for clarity.
I said for the next council meeting, but I'm at the discretion of.
No, I mean the time period, the years.
From 210 to 214 for both of them. Please and thank you. Yep. 210 to 214 for both of them.
Okay, I have a mover, I think Coughlin, and seconder, Deputy Mayor Allen. Okay, so this is the resolution we're going to put on the table before we change it and modify it with the additional requests. That the recommendations from the Finance and Audit Committee contained in item 9.2 be approved as presented. And now we'll have the discussion. We have the request from Councilor Ritchie for financial and tax from 2010 to 2014. Is that correct? And legal fees. Deputy Mayor Allen?
In addition to that, I would request an update of the schedule that Director Schmidt was just referring to update the 214 to 16, whatever it was, to include 217 and in the legal components.
So while our clerk is busily writing here, can I have a mover and a seconder for the amendment first on 9.2? Okay, Ritchie and Allen.
I have a question.
That's right, Councilor McConkie.
When we get these legal fees, are we going to put them in context of how they were going to be, how they were used and stuff? Because, yeah.
I think it's appropriate. Yeah, no, I think it's appropriate. If councilors want information, we will provide it, because I think it's available. Okay, moved by Ritchie, and this is an amendment, and seconded by Allen, that the motion now before council be amended as follows, and that detailed legal costs from 2010 to 2014 and the percentage of tax increase per year be provided to council, and that the legal component cost of 2014 to date be reported to council. Any questions or concern about that? Councillor Coghlan?
Not about the amendment, but when we come back to the original motion, I remember last time we had to pull the wording, or we decided to pull the wording about the financial statements because we couldn't just approve the F&A. Remember that Kerr thing last time? We have to approve the financial statements separate from any other reports within the Municipal Act. That was in our last meeting. So I just want to make sure that when we do approve 9.2, it is saying that we are approving the consolidated financial statements, not just the F&A report.
Any comment, Director Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coggan. So essentially 9.2, what you see there is the recommendation would be, if approved as is, would be approving the 2017 financial statements for the township.
Okay, having heard the motion, all those in favor of the amendment? Carried. And back to the original motion, moved by Coghlan, second by Allen. The recommendations from the Finance and Audit Committee contain item 9.2 be approved as presented, as amended, and that detailed legal costs from 2010, 2014, the percentage of tax increases per year be provided to council, that the legal component cost of 2014 to date be reported to council. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. We shall move on to 9.3 and get it on the table. I need a mover and a seconder. Austin and Allen. That the recommendation from the Finance and Audit Committee contained in item 9.3 be approved as presented. Okay. Now open to discussion. Who would like to? Councillor Coghlan.
Thank you, Mayor French, and through you to Director of Finance. My apologies for not meeting with you before this meeting. You are always open to that, and I did not make it in. So if we have to follow up on some of these, I completely understand. Moving forward to page 5 to the appendix. Point number 2 speaks to building fee permits, and it was to my understanding that building fee permits were to be running through the building department at a no cost impact. So how would that influence point 2?
Director Schmidt, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coghlan. So the way that the report is set up is that on page 5, we're talking about all revenues through our tax-supported operating budget, which building is part of. So although when we present the results, there are impacts from the building department on the revenue side, but then when we take into account the expenditures and our transfers to the reserves, the actual net impact for the whole building cost center is zero. But it's because we're explaining the variances, all the revenue variances and then all the expenditure variances. But if you actually looked at the Appendix A for the building cost center, you would see that the actual net impact to the township would actually be zero. So when we talk about the impact of what the surplus is, hence why there's no discussion about building services being part of that surplus, because they're not contributing to the surplus. There is a net zero impact for building services. Hopefully that clarifies, but.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mayor French. And then let's go down to point 5. And you have investment and interest income separated from investment income. So one was reading 62,000, the other one's reading 19,000. Can you just explain to me the difference between those two categories?
Director Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coghlan. So the comment states here that the investments, township investments impelling interest on outstanding property taxes. So investment and interest income was below budget by 62,000, and investment income was 19,000 higher than forecast. So it's actually the interest income that we're receiving for outstanding property taxes is lower, is about 62,000. So my apologies there. The investment piece or wording should be removed. It's just the interest income that we had projected from outstanding property taxes is much lower than what we had anticipated. And the reason for that is because the township is being much more aggressive on collecting property taxes. And in doing so, it actually impacts our revenue stream. However, it actually benefits our cash flow by collecting the funds.
Thank you, and sorry, Mayor French, which I believe what you were speaking to there is the 81,000, and that was consistent with year before. We have, even last year, we started to get better at collecting, so the justification there, I understand, it's the 62,000 that I don't, separated from the 19. I understand the 81,000 that I get, but the investment and interest income, and then separate again, investment income, which is again separated from the 81,000 that was under budget. So I don't understand the 62 versus 19.
Director Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coghlan. That is something that I think I'll have to circle back with you on just to verify, if you're okay with that.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Any other questions on 9.3? Councillor Coghlan?
Apologies. On point 12, it speaks to the economic development transition funding, and that's the first I had read of that. So if there's any, maybe economic development, CAO Brindley or someone could explain to me what that funding is.
Director Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coghlan. So you may recall that the township has been in part of this transition funding with the county of Simcoe. So I can't recall the actual year we started. I think it was 2 years ago maybe. I think we're in our third year maybe. And so each year it's a $50,000 commitment, and then each year the amount of money that they provide to us is reduced by 25%.
Sorry. So that's the 4-year program where we paid 100% in the 4th year. So next year will be our 4th year, so I can see this. So that would be 75% this year, so I can see that number going up next year.
100%. Yeah.
Don't worry,
Carry
there's
on.
only 4 more questions. It said then, on point 16, it said that EDHS 50K was not expensed. And why was that?
Director Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coghlan. So you may recall that we, council passed a resolution or a recommendation whereby 50,000 would be put away for the next 10 years as the commitment towards that project, because essentially no request has been made by the school board for those funds. Essentially, we did budget for 50,000, but we haven't paid any money towards that project at this stage. So no funds have been expensed.
Follow-up?
Follow up on that. So we're not putting 50,000 away every year so that when they do ask for it, we have it?
Director Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Coghlan. So essentially, the funds, we are doing that through our operating budget, 50,000 every year. And again, it is funded through, I believe, DCs. And so to the extent that we actually don't pay the money stays in the development charges.
And maybe to expand on that too, it's my understanding that until we have the shared use agreement, which Mr. Belcourt is working on, that's when the clock really starts ticking. So for some reason, like there isn't a catch-up phase, it'll be simply funded for that 10 years after we have a satisfactory shared use agreement. It was, I think, the way the resolution someone was suggested. Okay, good. Any other questions on 9.3? Okay, Councillor Coghlan.
Sorry, I'm trying to. So in the capital highlights, which is on page 10 of 11, it speaks to specific project numbers, which when you go back, it says that those projects are completed. So the one is the Rescue 59 and then Young Street, but we're transferring, it says that we transferred money from a completed project to a project that's not complete, and I don't know how that would be possible.
Director Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coghlan. So you may recall that back in September, I believe, of last year, there was a report from our fire chief recommending that council proceed with the purchase of a new pump or apparatus, I guess is what they're known as. And so what we did is there was two projects in the 2017 budget where we essentially combined the two projects, and we went ahead and we purchased the funds, and then we've rebudgeted funds in the 2018-2019 budget to purchase the other vehicle. So there wasn't enough funds in the 2017 budget, original 2017 budget, to purchase the piece of equipment that was originally requested. So we did come to council in September and requested that those funds be reallocated.
Carry on.
Thank you. So understanding that, we took the 2019 job and brought it forward to the 2017 job to make sure that we had enough to pay for that. But it's the Young Street, we were 300,000, like when it says here that there was the 299 was allocated to 2017-18, which is Young Street, which says that it was completed and it came in at a like we were under budget by 17,000. So I'm just not following that transfer.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Coghlan. So again, you may recall that there was a council report on the Young Street project when I believe it was tendered, and the tender, I believe, came in over what the budget was. And so through that staff report, staff requested additional funding for that project. So there was an additional approximately $300,000 that was requested to complete that project. It ended up that the project didn't quite need the additional $300,000.
I'll follow up with that one. Thanks.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, there's no amendment to that. That the recommendation of the Finance and Audit Committee containing item 9.3 be approved as presented. All those in favor? Carried. We'll move on to 9.4, and I have a mover and a second to get this on the floor. Austin Coghlan. That the recommendations from the Finance and Audit Committee contained in item 9.4 be approved as presented. Questions? Who wanted to pull this one? Councillor Coghlan.
Thank you, Mayor French, and through you to Director Schmidt. Page 2 of 9.4 speaks to the working group fund. Is that a different title for tax stabilization? Because I don't see the working group or working reserve listed on the reserves. But I do recall a conversation we had that you were going to collapse the tax stabilization and the working group together. So I was just curious if that had been done, and that's why.
Director Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coghlan. So I believe we're talking about item 9.4, correct? So 9.4 is specific to development charges only, and hence we're only reporting on the status of those, and hence the working reserve is not a DC reserve fund.
Okay, any questions on 9.4? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. We'll move on to 9.5 to get this one on the table. A mover and a seconder. Alan? Austin. The recommendation from the Finance and Audit Committee contained in item 9.5 be approved as presented. Questions? Councillor Coghlan.
Thank you, Mayor French. And my apologies, I wrote down the wrong number, so I'll have to follow up with you on the other questions. So on this one, it says that on the 29.1, we do earn interest, and I was just curious at the rate that the interest is earned, because if you
Director Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coghlan. The rate varies depending on how much we invest and when we invest, so the rate can change daily, if you will. It's based on prime bank rank, and then we typically will go out to our financial institution and see what types of rates that we can obtain, and for different terms, so whether it be 90 days, 120 days, and so on and so forth. So the rate can vary depending on when we go out to the market and seek the investment.
Follow-up?
Thank you. So this is separate from the approved investments that you're able to make. You were explaining to me at one point the umbrella that you were allowed to take it for higher risk investments or higher return investments. So this 29.1 million is invested at something that's getting us 1 or 2%. Like, I'm just asking for a ballpark here.
Director Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coghlan. So in the absence of a formal investment policy whereby we could potentially be going out to market and potentially risking some of those funds, to be honest with you, because again, risk reward, typically if you get a higher rate of return, there's more risk. And so me being the conservative guy I am, I try to make sure that there is no risk. So typically most of the investments that we currently have in place are guaranteed investment certificates, or in there there's no risk. And so yes, the rate of return is obviously lower than what we might be able to get. But again, we will be coming forward with financial policies, one being the investment policy that we can take a look at and determine whether we want to look at other investment mechanisms to see if we can be obtaining additional returns. But until that actual investment policy comes forward, my hands are a little bit tied because I don't have the authority to go out and just do those types of investments at this stage.
So ballparking between 1 and 2%. It's for my own curiosity, and it's something that does come up. When we explain to people that we have reserves, and then people are asking, well, you're taking money from me to put into reserves, it's not making any money. And I can explain to them what you've said about the risk and reward. I get that. And then you have always come forward about having an investment policy and that you are working on it, and it's something we've gone through the approved vendors. It's just a ballpark number that I would like to be able to have to relay to residents.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coghlan. So the rates are anywhere from 1.5% to over 3% is what we've been getting.
Thank you.
Also, I guess when it comes to reserves, sometimes the terminology is not quite right, because they may be reserves, but they're kind of earmarked for future expenditures for the most part, and something down the road. So I know we call it reserves, but it's not money we can just run around and, hey, we have this great idea, expenditure. So, I mean, and I know that's the terminology that's used, but when people are saying, you're just taking my money, well, we take it now or increase your taxes up and down as we need it, which probably would be a little more difficult in the digestive tract. Director Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's correct. And one of the things that we have been working on, and again, it comes down to resources to some degree, is we've been looking at our cash flow and trying to make sure that we're monitoring our cash flow more appropriately and trying to determine how much cash we actually need on hand at any point in time. The difficulty with that is not necessarily having an exact picture of when certain expenses are going to be going out the door. And so, again, trying to be conservative and trying to keep a certain level of funding so that we don't have to be borrowing, if you will, or temporary borrowing. So again, we have been working on that, and hence I think when I first started here, I wasn't necessarily as much involved in the investments, but I believe since then, you can see in the financial statements that we have for 2017, I think when I first started here, our investments were less than $1 million. Now we're over $15 million in investments. So we are starting to move forward. Have we been as aggressive as what we could be? No, but we're starting down that path, so.
Thank you, and I think Iceland had a problem when they got aggressive in their investments. Councillor Coghlan.
Thank you, Mayor French. The question that I had asked on 9.4 is for 9.5. So the working reserve, which you refer to in the appendix, on Appendix A, is that a house for a lot of them, or where does it appear on Appendix A?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coggin. So the working funds reserve is about a quarter of the way down on Appendix A under the capital reserve line item. It's currently, at the end of 2017, approximately $1.4 million.
Follow up?
And so does that have more than one in it? Is it a house for more, it's just strictly one specific reserve? And the intention or the terms for that working reserve is similar to the tax stabilization reserve?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coggin. That's correct. That's one of those things that we talked about, I think, when we were going through the long-range financial plan, is starting to try to collapse the working fund reserve into a tax rate stabilization reserve, and also taking a look at all of our reserves and determining how many reserves do we actually really need, and start to consolidate some of them. We haven't yet done that.
Just two more. The Springwater Park Reserve, it was $10,000 withdrawal. What was that for?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coghlan. So you may recall, and my CAO reminded me a few times, that there was a sunset clause on this particular reserve. So back, I believe, in 2014, I want to say, that there was a motion by council to put $10,000 into a Springwater Park reserve. However, there was also part of that motion indicated that there would be a sunset clause. So if the funds were not used, they would be returned back to its original source, and the original source being the Economic Development Reserve. So the $10,000 has been paid back to the Economic Development Reserve.
Thank you. And last question through you, it might be to Director Spagnell. Director Coleman, the Anton Mills water, understanding that there is issues that are going to need to be addressed, the reserve, is there a reason why it's not being built up?
Director Schmidt's going to take this one.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Councillor Coghlan. So the Anton Mills Water Reserve, which I believe you're looking at page 2 of Appendix A, so that is the actual DC Reserve Fund. So that is based on any building permits that are issued in Anton Mills, which hasn't been very many. Essentially, any time a building permit is issued, we'd be collecting DCs, and that would be going into that account. So it's DC specific, and hence, to your comment about potential projects down the road, we're going to have to take a look at different funding sources for any improvements in that system. And again, some of those improvements wouldn't be growth related anyways, so they wouldn't be funded out of this DC reserve. They'd be funded out of our water reserve fund, which is on page 1 of Appendix A. Or could be funded out of the water reserve fund, sorry.
And then, sorry, so on page 2 of 2, if it doesn't specify and say DC, because all the other ones say DC beside them, Anton Mills, Minising, Center Vesper don't. So this is just, that's what made me assume, because it didn't say DC beside it.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Coghlan. So yes, those are all obligatory reserve funds, so they are all DC related funds. So that's something staff can take a look at and make sure we identify them as such.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All those in favor? Carried. (9.6). Mover in a second to get this on the table. Hannah Allen. That the recommendation from the Finance and Audit Committee contained in items 9.6 be approved as presented. Questions, comments? Sure. Councillor Coghlan.
Thank you. Appendix A, the page 1, it offers it says variance notes 1 through 6. If I could have those forwarded to me, they're not available in this report, so I don't know if it was made available. On the rest of it, it's all just underneath, so just page 1 is missing.
Director Schmidt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Councillor Coghlan. So if you actually look at the staff report, what we tried to do is we tried to explain the various explanations within the staff report. So item 1 through 6 is explained in the staff report for Appendix A.
Carry on, Councillor Coghlan.
Sorry, my question might not be posed properly. For example, on page number 2, or sorry, and all the rest of them, the variance notes are provided underneath the table, so it's just repeated then, is what we're saying?
Director Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Coghlan. So what we did is because the first page is the summary of all of the tax operating cost centers, we didn't provide the explanations on this particular page. We actually provided them embedded within the actual staff report for all the tax-based operating departments. So the explanations that you're seeing, or the variance notes that you're seeing in Appendix A, are actually explained within the body of the staff report.
Councillor Coghlan?
On page 9, there's a 21,000 COA application, and I'm just wondering how that would accrue.
Director Schmidt?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Coghlan, I believe that's related to the Stone Manor Woods 8 lot application, minor variance application, which I believe went through Committee of Adjustment, but I can defer that question to Director Spagnell.
Director Spagnell?
Thank you, Mayor French. To Councillor Coghlan. That refers to 8 consent applications for severance, and then there's a number of boundary adjustments that have been applied for in the Stone Manor Woods subdivision.
Thank you.
Any other questions on 9.6? Did you have?
Let's do 9.6. I just want to make a comment before we go into 10.
Okay. Do you want to do this first? Okay. So, remind everybody, the movers Hannah, seconded by Allen, that the recommendation from the Finance and Audit Committee contained in item 9.6 be approved as presented. All those in favor? Carried. And Deputy Mayor Allen, want to make a comment?
Thank you, Mayor French. Just before we move on to the next item, number 10, correspondence and information, I just want to, I know Councillor Coghlan probably felt lonely asking all the questions. Just remind people that the Finance and Audit Committee that Councillor Hannah and myself sit on spent a long time going through each of these reports, asking lots of questions. And I just want to commend Director Schmidt and the senior management team for presenting the information very well, having a very clean audit, answering all the auditor's questions, no problems. So it was another very smooth audit and reporting to the Finance and Audit Committee. And thank you for all the hard work.
Councillor McConkey?
May I ask that instead of going to the series of the 10, the correspondence, that we go to the action items based on the audience? We've kept them here for quite a while, and I just wondered if we could change the order.
Well, unless there's a long discussion, we can deal with the correspondence and information items, and then I will, that's appropriate, and we'll find out how many is here that need to be moved forward. So if I have a mover and a seconder to get the correspondence on information items 10.2 to 10.6 on the table, that would be great. Austin and Richie? Okay, is there any of these that we do want to pull or just comment on? Councilor McConkey?
Increase base funding. I do, number 10.3, it's just a comment. I do agree, but you can't tell the government as to where they can take it because they're offering advice, so that's why I step away. But I do support that NVCA needs some more base funding. They haven't had an increase in the amount of years, so I didn't know how other councillors felt on that.
As a matter of fact, if you recall, we actually did a similar letter of endorsement about 2 years ago. We sent it to the government because our piece keeps going up and the province doesn't. So yes, thank you. Any other comments on these items? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Okay, with that in mind, I see definitely we have two, and maybe since it's a 2-to-1 ratio here, maybe we'll pull out 11.2 first. And then we'll go to the single proponent for 11.1. So can I have this is authorization to execute and register Cameron Estates subdivision. So, and I'll read the long resolution, and when I have a mover and a seconder, can I have Coghlan and McConkey? And I'll read what we're dealing with here. That the report from the planner regarding SU-2016-001 authorization to execute and register Cameron Estates subdivision dated May 16, 2018 be received. That the county of Simcoe be notified that sufficient water and sanitary sewer capacity is available and allocated to service phase 1 of the subdivision. That phase 2 of the development will require further confirmation. That the mayor and clerk be authorized to execute the subdivision agreement for the Cameron Estates subdivision, which is to be registered subject to any final modifications. Any questions on this? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Smith, and thank you, Mr. Sheardon. I would have got to you sooner, but we did have to deal with some other matters. And now we will jump back to 11.1 signed bylaw request for a grace period. Can I have a mover and a seconder to get this on the table? Hannah and McConkey. That the report from the Director of Planning Services and Bylaw Enforcement regarding signed bylaw request for grace period 68 Glen Huron Drive, dated May 16, 2018 be received. That council does not support the request for 2-year grace period. That's the motion on the floor. And now it's open to discussion. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you, Mayor French. I did speak to our Director of Planning and Bylaw, and while the report doesn't indicate it, there was conversation with the MTO, and the sign would be in violation of the MTO regulations, which is not clearly identified in this report. So I would suggest that with all the information we have before us, unfortunately, for the gentleman who's invested the money, I would suggest we have to support staff in not allowing that sign to be there. I would suggest strongly that anything we can do to accommodate the owner of the sign and relocating that sign to someplace else that would be, that would conform with our bylaw, we should try to do that. So the sign, while it's been there, it's an investment made into it, but that sign can be taken away and used someplace else. Support going someplace else that conforms with our bylaw.
Other comments? Councillor McConkey.
This was a bylaw that we did put in, but I also feel when we put a bylaw in, we're calling it a grace period, but I like a period where you can become compliant. And I believe in some of our bylaws in the future, we should actually look at that, because you can't ask somebody all of a sudden day 2 to be compliant with something. And I really do believe that there should be a compliance time. I believe, I even have thought of it for future considerations of bringing up something like that on certain bylaws, because you just don't know how it can impact you. So I'd like to recommend that we change the request of a 2-year grace to say a 1-year compliance. And that would sort of meet halfway. It's just throwing it out there.
Councillor Coghlan.
Thank you. Follow up to Councillor McConkey's question. The update for the sign bylaw that we did, if this bylaw was not updated, would this sign have been in contravention of our previous bylaw?
Director Spagno.
Thank you, Mayor French. To Councillor Coghlan. The answer is yes, it would have been.
So just so even if we didn't update it, my question about grandfathering is that even though we did update a bylaw, this sign was in contravention to the pre-existing bylaw. So my question is, how do you grandfather something that's never been in conformity with our bylaws?
Director Spagno, if you want to comment.
Thank you, Mayor Franchita, Councillor Coghlan. The answer is you can't. The test to actually look at anything with respect to grandfathering, this I would say more applies to when you're dealing with zoning and things of that nature, really comes down to as to whether or not the structure of the building was legally established the day that it was constructed.
I guess I have a comment, because usually I'd be fully supportive of this report. Actually, I'm not. I think the reason being, there's no question. I think the proponent is a businessman. I think he should have applied for kind of a sign permit, because yes, it wasn't permitted. Actually, I don't think any local business signs were permitted under our own bylaw. It would be the kind of the interpretation of it, and so we actually softened that with our update. And the only reason I would even suggest any concession and temporary use is that, now, the MTO may come and tell them to take it down, but that's a separate issue, separate from us. When I've driven by there a number of times, and now that everything's green, that sign, not exactly visible from that neighborhood backyard. So if we want to assist a resident, I wouldn't entertain a 2-year grace period, but I would definitely kind of suggest a grace period until the end of this year. If someone on council would, I would support that if someone proposed that. Because yes, it shouldn't be there, it shouldn't have been done, we don't want to promote kind of breaches of our bylaw, but I do find this a little unusual, the way it took place in that, and yes, it didn't follow proper procedure or application, and that alone is a reason to kind of deny the request, but that's my position on it, because when I first heard about it, I said, well, that sign shouldn't be there. But now, as I've driven by it for a month or so, it just, it's between the highway and the road, trees that backs and all those properties. So it's not exactly causing a real eyesore to the local neighborhood, which I think is who I'd like to take care of. And I don't see a large group in our audience here, wanting that sign removed tomorrow. Councillor Coghlan. Sorry, Councillor McConkey.
I would support your suggestion. I would put that together as a motion, but I don't know when the timing is, and I do have someone who would second to that effect if it goes to the end of the year.
I think it would be an amendment. Councillor Coghlan?
Thank you, Mayor French. Understanding bylaw works with, I believe you have a 3-step program. It's awareness. What are the 3 steps? One of them is conformity. So how long under this current bylaw does the resident have to come into conformity?
Director Spagno, I'll let you give the answer.
Thank you, Mayor Franchita, Councillor Coghlan. Really, the timeframe really gets set on when any charges are laid through the court process. So there are certain timelines that have to be met when our bylaw enforcement officer would act on issuing the certain papers with the courts. So the duration I have in my mind is there's 6 months to issue certain papers, and then there's a process to extend on that. So it's an ongoing issue with respect to submitting the actual orders within court to reach compliance. I think the one key point is that we are dealing with a complaint here where a resident has complained about the sign. So there has to be some sort of a response, and it's more with respect to the message that it sends to that complainant with respect to the township's bylaws and upkeeping those bylaws and making sure that there's compliance. So I'd have to go back and find out the actual timeframes for when certain orders have to be issued with the courts, but there are timeframes to which that does have to occur from the time that the complaint is issued in order to achieve compliance through the court system.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mayor French. And I guess my point is, in my opinion. If council chooses to amend or grandfather or whatever, or allow the sign to stay, there are a lot of local businesses that would love the ability for some free advertising, and I understand there's a cost to putting that billboard up, but, I mean, we allow one resident to do that, but not every other resident. I don't think that's the point of a bylaw. I think that it existed, we approved it because we wanted to give residents an avenue to come forward to ensure that signs of this nature are not in residential areas. So my concern is we approve this or do not agree with, it's difficult when it's a not approved on a staff report for me, but if we choose to allow this sign to remain and tomorrow or next week or at the end of the month, we have the same complaint coming forward about billboards that are going up, how are we then going to say to the other residents they're allowed to do it? I don't see that this is, it's setting a precedent, and I think that we need to be behind our bylaw.
I'll go to Councillor Ritchie and then to Councillor McConkey.
Thank you, Mayor French. I don't know if I'm out of the step here or not, but I'd like to know from the person that owns this. First off, I'd like to just say, I'm surprised we can't find something from the MTO, because they're usually fairly stringent about signs along the highway. Oh yeah, I've been through the process. Having said that, the person that owns this, that's here tonight, what due diligence did you do on your part when you bought this property, when you looked into this sign? Did you do anything of any sort? That's something I'd like to ask him.
Actually, I mean, if you want to respond, but the fact there was no application filed, but I'll allow you to respond if you like.
Sorry, Councillor, what was the question? What did I do to make sure that it was legally conforming when I bought the property?
When you bought the property,
Yeah.
either yourself or your realtor,
Yeah.
what due diligence did you do on your part to look into making sure that that sign was legal and that you could use it?
I didn't realize the sign was on my property when I bought it.
You didn't see it on your property?
I didn't even notice it because the trees were up and like there's leaves, you can hardly see it. It wasn't until the fall when we were doing construction, I was on the construction site, the leaves had fallen and we saw the sign and the framer brought it to my attention. He said, hey, you got a sign on your property. And I thought, well, that's great. I'll put a sign on it.
Mayor French, did you go to the seller of the property, which is Sargent's, and ask them about it, if they had taken out a permit and for the sign and what have you and that? Like, this is all due diligence on your part.
Yes, so I spoke to my neighbor, he's the former CEO of Sargent's, Patrick, and I asked him about it, and he said they didn't take any permits or anything either. When they bought the property, the real estate agent, Hassey, was the realtor.
Correct.
He put the sign up. It was his sign. And then they did what I did. They just piggybanked their sign onto his. And I said, well, that's a great idea. I'm just going to piggybank mine onto theirs.
Okay.
So there's like 3 layers of signs there of
Yeah.
the new owners just piggybanking on Hassey's original sign. I called Hassey. I spoke to his daughter. I forgot her name. And she called me back. She said, yes, my dad, he put up the sign. He paid. He put up the sign, and he got all the permits. But she said that was like 15 years ago. She says, we have none of the paperwork. She goes, I can check for it, but we have nothing left. But
I'm surprised MTO does not have something on record, but it puts us in a bit of a pickle here because, you know, we've got a bylaw that we've brought in, and I feel for you, but we also got a bylaw we got to uphold as well too. So, you know, grace period or no grace period. The fact is, it's there, and we got to do something. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to support that thing come down. If you can find and move that up the road, and we can work with you on something like that, fine. But the way that sits right now,
I don't think that'd be good for you guys. If you move it, then again, you'll have to give me a time constraint, and it might be more headaches for council. Why don't I just take it down? But if you guys pay to take it down, I'm okay with that, because that's a huge
Point
sign.
of order, Mayor French?
I don't think where it's our responsibility to pay us to take that sign down. Like, I'm going to draw a line in the sand, sir. I'm sorry, but it's on your property, and if you didn't walk the whole property when you were looking at that house, I'm sorry, but
Because it looks like it's on the highway, right?
Well-
That's why.
Still, was there a survey that came with the property? You know, I'm sorry, I want to help you, trust me, but I think.
Point of
we-
order, Mayor
tonight-
French.
Yes?
I understand that this is and I appreciate that, we did receive a delegation from this individual at our last meeting. The opportunity to ask questions was then, we have a staff report in front of us, and I would like to call the vote.
Okay, I think Director Spagno. Yes. Director Spagno, you had comment?
Yes, thank you, Mayor French. Just to give council something to consider, staff did talk to the MTO about any permits that were provided for on the property. They don't have any permits on file. The indication to me from MTO was that any permit that would have been issued would have been on a temporary basis. And as far as the duration for the sign that it's been there, that doesn't represent a temporary basis. If you're talking, based on the report where it says it's at least been there since 2007, I think it's been longer. They also did indicate that it does not meet their policy with the MTO policies with respect to setbacks for the signage. And in addition to that, it doesn't meet it doesn't meet the township sign bylaw as well. So we've got two policies that we're talking about an infraction of, and we don't have any permits on file for the sign in the first place. Those are my closing comments with respect to the report, just for council's consideration.
Does anybody else want to comment? Someone has called the vote. Councillor McConkey?
Councillor Coghlan talked about other people would like this. I think that we have to look at that as net new, like there are businesses net new and it wouldn't be permitted, and we look at that differently, but this is still bringing something into compliance. So I know Director Spagnol talked about you had to look at your timing of things. So like, I just wanted to know by approving a motion to leave it till the end of the year, if you went through all of the court, and we do that, to close off the process that way, would that be sort of in the same time frames that you're looking at where you start to issue orders and stuff?
Director Spagno?
Thank you, Mayor French. To Councillor McConkey. As we stated before, we always try to achieve compliance without going through the court system. Now, that said, there's an expectation from a taxpayer that there will be compliance based on the complaint. And the first, as noted earlier, it's educate, inform, educate, and always a last resort to enforce by way of the court. So staff always tries to get compliance without going through the court system. In this instance here, we're in a tough spot where the bylaw doesn't provide for any exemption. So from staff's perspective, we have a job to do to uphold our bylaw, and we have to achieve compliance in any which way form that we can.
Okay. Now, I know there's some discussion. I have a vote call, but there was some conversation about an amendment. If there's no amendment, we're going to call the vote. Councillor McConkey?
Still will make an amendment because I believe that we should have, in the bylaw, allowed for compliance, and I will bring that in future considerations, that there should be a compliance time added to the bylaw in future.
Okay. So
So I would like to give till the end of the year for compliance, so December, is it 31st or? And at that point, it must be removed or the court action would happen.
So do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Anna?
Mayor French. Can I just say, even just thank you, even just for considering this, even if you guys don't vote in my favor, I appreciate you guys taking the time to discuss it.
We'll see where it goes. Madam Clerk's going to read the amendment.
The amendment would be as follows, that the motion now before council be amended as follows. Delete the second paragraph and add, and that a compliance time be provided until December 31st, 2018. And if at that time the sign is not removed, the sign is not removed, that court proceedings will commence.
So I need a seconder, Councillor Hanna. Okay, so we're dealing with the amendment first. All those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? I guess, yeah. So the amendment carries. And now we go back to the main motion. And moved by Hanna and seconded McConkey, that the report from the Director of Planning Services and Bylaw Enforcement regarding sign bylaw request for grace period 68 Glen Huron Drive, dated May 16, 2018, be received, and that a compliance time be provided until December 31st, 2018, and if at that time the sign is not removed, that court proceedings will commence. All those in favor? Yeah. Opposed? That carries. So you have until December 31st to get it down.
I'll have to get it down before then, there'll be too much snow. Thanks very much, guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good night.
Okay, maybe we'll take a 5-minute comfort break, because we've been here a little bit. Okay, we shall reconvene. Moving on to 11.3 Scarlet Line subdivision. Can I have a mover and a seconder to get this on the table? Ritchie, Coghlan. That the report from the planner regarding the Scarlet Line subdivision authorization and endorsement report dated May 16, 2018 be received. The council authorized the developer to tie into the existing Hillsdale water system for the purposes of servicing 15 residential lots. That the mayor and clerk be authorized to execute the subdivision agreement for Scarlet Line subdivision, which is to be registered subject to clearance of any remaining draft plan conditions of approval. Turn to council. Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. $11.4 Elmville Village Phase 1A2. Can I have a mover and a second to get this on the table? Allen and Austin. That the report from the Director of Public Works regarding the assessment of development securities for Elmville Village Phase 1A2 be received and that $118,849.86 be returned to the developer. Any questions on this? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. $11.5 Community Improvement Plan application, sign improvement. Can I get the mover and a seconder to bring this on the table? Austin and Coghlan. That the report from the junior planner regarding CI-2018-002 Lakelands irrigation dated May 16, 2018 be received. The council, having considered the application, presented the requirements of the community improvement plan and total funding requested direct as follows: that the application be approved and mayor and clerk be authorized to execute the appropriate agreements, or that the application be refused and the applicant be so notified. Discussion, comments? Okay, is the mover and seconder supporting the approval? Okay, all those in favor? Carried. $11.6 Springwater Township website project vendor of record. And can I have a mover and seconder to get this on the table? Coghlan and Allen. That the report from the Director of Planning Services regarding the Springwater Township website project vendor of record report dated May 16, 2018 be received. That council endorse staff's approach selecting eSolutions as a vendor of record for the completion of the township's website project for a maximum cost of $30,000. Questions? Deputy Mayor Allen.
Thank you, Mayor French. I can't recall in the report whether it stated a time frame for completion, estimated completion of this, please.
Maybe go to either Director Spagnol or CAO Brindley.
Thank you, Mayor French. Through you to Deputy Mayor Allen. The estimated time for completion would be in between 8 months to a year.
Other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. $11.7 St. Patrick's Drive reconstruction. Can I have a mover and seconder to get this on the floor? Coghlan and Ritchie. That the report from the Director of Public Works regarding St. Patrick's Drive reconstruction Phase 2 be received. That Duvin Vorden Haulage Inc. be awarded the contract for the reconstruction of St. Patrick's Drive in the corrected amount of $871,158.81, including HST, that the necessary documents be executed by the mayor and clerk. Any questions of our Director of Public Works on this matter? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. And 11.8, request for proposal, the wheel excavator. Can I have a mover and a seconder to get this on the floor? Ritchie, Coghlan. That the report from the operations technician regarding RFP-04-2018 wheeled excavator complete with RSM 36 or equivalent brushing head dated May 16, 2018 be received. That the RFP-PW-04-2018 wheeled excavator be canceled and deferred to 2019. That the funds included in the 2018 capital budget be transferred to the Public Works Capital Reserve. Questions of this? Director Coleman's here. Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Hazardous Material Response Memorandum, a mover and a seconder to get this on the table. Alan and Hannah. That the report from the Fire Chief Gavay regarding the Hazardous Material Memorandum of Understanding dated May 16, 2018 be received. The mayor and clerk be authorized to execute the Memorandum of Understanding to establish and operate a multi-jurisdictional, multidisciplinary hazardous materials, HAZMAT, incident response team with the County of Simcoe. Questions, and Chief Gavay is here. Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. And this is the fireworks bylaw. Can I have a mover and a second to get this on the floor? Ritchie and Austin. That the report from the clerk regarding draft fireworks bylaw dash notice of public consultation dated May 16, 2018 be received. That public consultation of the draft fireworks bylaw take place on the township website for a period of 30 days commencing May 31st, 2018. So we're not approving, we're just taking input at this time, just so we're all aware. Any questions or comments? Go to Councilor McConkey first.
I'd like to look at staff for some more creativity of how we can receive input. This is quite an emotional topic. I just threw it out there on Facebook today and got different types of feedback. I got where, you know, this is our property, we would like to be able to have more time and different cultures maybe want to celebrate their events. So are we just to sort of keep it to those weekends and that? So I was getting quite a bit of feedback. Plus I also got, yes, the other ones where, you know, it's hard on the dogs and the children, you know, and stuff. So I just really want the input received because, you know, I do have rural and I do have subdivision, and I'd like to understand the addresses when we receive the feedback, because sometimes in a rural area, you can maybe, your danger level could reduce if you're, you know, so if this isn't going to be really implemented this year, I would like to take the time from the 30-day to make it longer to receive the input. And I would like that it's not just via email, because I have a lot of also rural people who do not have email. Like if they want, I would rather have a public meeting where we can hear everybody together come with their feedback. So I think the feedback is very important. Like, to me, this is emotional to me because this is how I was brought up, with fireworks, with the family, with friends. It's sort of almost like heritage to me, doing it on these long weekends, but I could never say that this is the day I'm going to do it. It's when can my friends from the city come up and join me to do the fireworks. I don't do them now, but I know that that is how some of the younger families do it. So it goes both ways, and I just like to hear as much feedback as I can from my residents, and I don't know the best way, but it's not just going to our website and getting feedback. I think we have to push it out there a little bit more, and I don't think that this will be resolved in time for any of those 2 holidays that are suggested. So let's take our time, get it right, and get the proper feedback.
Thank you for those comments. Any other questions or comments on this? Because right now we're dealing with suggested 30 days. Councillor Hannah.
Thank you. I just have to add that this is not stopping people from having personal fireworks. Yep, it's controlling some dates, but right now, I understand with our township bylaws, if we have a fire ban, that does not prohibit people from setting off fireworks, which is really dangerous in a fire ban. So I think we need to go forward with a fireworks bylaw for a number of reasons. We don't want another Fort McMurray, but I understand Councillor Coughlin's concerns, and I think there's permits that are possible if somebody wants to have a special occasion, but I can't remember the last time I read that, whether that was in there or not. But I know we need this bylaw, and we need to do whatever we have to do to move it forward. And given the public 30 days to respond, I think that's a good idea, and I support that.
Any other comments? Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Mayor French. I'd like to know the $5 million liability. What's the cost factor to that? How much is that going to cost for somebody to pull that out?
I think we'll get that answer back to you. Deputy Mayor Allen?
Did you have a follow-on?
And a follow-up to that, why does it have to be 5 million? Why not 2 million, 1 million, 3 million? Like, I'm sure there must have been some thought go into the process, but why and the cost factor would be greatly, because that's going to be affecting some of these moving forward on this. Thank you.
CEO Brindley?
Mr. Mayor, first of all, the insurance coverage really only applies to what would be the commercial fireworks or the public works displays, similar to what we did at the Celebrate Springwater last year. We can get you a cost, I just don't have that handy. I'm trying to forgive me the second question, Councillor Ritchie.
It was the cost and the, what was the other one?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor Ritchie, the 5 million that was recommended by our insurance company and what sort of is a standard amount today. I actually had a meeting this morning and they were saying $1 million is nothing today. And our insurance company is recommending through this $5 million.
So if I could just follow up, Mayor French. All right, so the Phelps Parks and Rec that holds their July 1st at the ballpark in Phelps, I just want to run through this. We have a lot of people come to that. I find that to be a perfect spot. It's back behind the ball. It's over in the ball field. People are over in the bleachers. It's a great facility. A lot of people there last year. In fact, I think we were the only ones last year for that. So for the Phelps and Rec Committee, what's this going to cost them in order to apply for this?
Maybe Director Belcourt may want to comment. My understanding is actually they farm it out to Kiwanis or whatever, and Kiwanis provide all the insurance, the operators and everything. So I'm not sure it's a direct cost, but Director Belcourt?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Ritchie. Mayor French is correct that the third-party vendor, which would be the Kiwanis, would be providing their insurance, naming the municipality as an additional insured. And as far as the Phelpston Community Rec Association, they are insured through the municipality for their events. So there'll be no additional cost to the community association to provide that.
Mayor French. And I think you should add the fee on that too. They should be exempt because it's Phelpston. So, thank you. And Hillsdale. Maybe Menacing.
Councillor Coghlan.
Thank you, Mayor French, and follow up to Councillor Ritchie. So the other, Anton Mills Hall will no longer, through this bylaw, be able to have their fireworks for their Christmas, is what I'm reading, correct?
I'll go to whomever, CEO Brindley or Director Spagno.
Through Mr. Mayor and to Councillor Coghlan, right now, as the bylaw sets, it only allows it on the normal holidays, not on that day. Yeah.
I'll be sure to follow up with the hall board. There's a new chair and, a whole new hall board, so, and make sure that they provide comment and feedback during that 30-day.
Councillor McConkey.
So do we agree that we would have another method of communication within that 30-day time? Because I, again, don't believe everyone has access to the internet.
Okay, I'm going to turn to the clerk. She has a comment.
Yes, thank you. Just to clarify the public consultation process, the notification will be in the Springwater link, which goes out to all of the residents. The bylaw will be able to be viewed online, but there will be provisions where somebody can come into the office and view the bylaw. It's only a few pages. I can get it mailed to them. There's different avenues for them to be able to provide comments. They can also, instead of emailing comments, it's not specific to just emailing comments in. They can drop comments off at the office. And extending it to a 60-day period, if that's what council wishes, would not be anything additional.
I guess my only comment would be is, and we did it with the tree cutting bylaw, we had part of our separate meeting where we had people, I think there were only 2 or 3 people here, but is there any reason we couldn't, prior to one of our council meetings, have a special meeting to invite whoever wants to comment, come out and collect their comments, and so anybody that's really interested probably would come out and do that. So that might be another way of doing it. Councillor Coghlan?
Thank you, Mayor French. My comment on that would be, once this communication does go out to the residents about this, there will be a 60-day period. It will be on an agenda again, and that council meeting will have a question period. So if any additional questions might come to council's attention through that, I don't know that having a separate meeting, I don't know.
No, that's fine. That's a good opinion. I would support it. CAO Brindley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Regardless, this has to come back to council, and it can be dealt with, as Councillor Coghlan has talked about, either through a question period or an item on the agenda where staff review the comments. Because I think it would come back as a full report to council in the future, if it's, at least 60 days from now, if council wants the additional time.
Okay, so right now we're back to Madam Clerk.
Thank you. And the subsequent report to this will include all of the comments received. So depending on the magnitude of it, council may decide to have a public meeting depending on what kind of comments are received. But council will be made aware of absolutely every comment that comes through.
So do we need an amendment to change it to 60 or? Okay, so we can just amend the. Okay, so if it's still supported by Ritchie and Austin, that the report from the clerk regarding draft fireworks bylaw, notice of public consultation dated May 16, 2018 be received. That public consultation of the draft fireworks bylaw take place on the township website for a period of 60 days commencing May 31st, 2018. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Heritage Committee can get this on the floor. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Hannah Coghlan. That the report from the Deputy Clerk regarding the Heritage Committee's request to evaluate community halls dated May 16, 2018 be received. That a council approve of the Heritage Committee evaluating all community halls for heritage value, starting with the Midhurst Hall in 2018. Questions? Councillor Austin?
Yes, thank you, Mayor French. Under budget implications, it says that committee members would receive remuneration in the amount of $40 each for attending a meeting where a property is evaluated, which may possibly be in addition to the regular scheduled meetings. So do we have any rough idea, what that might cost and where that money would come from?
Did C.O. Brindley, did you want to comment on something, or did you have more of a question? Okay, all right. Okay, so maybe I'll go to a deputy clerk to respond to the question about what the cost might be for these extra meetings.
Through your mayor to Councillor Austin, part of our committees is that we do remuneration for them to attend meetings. Normally, for them to evaluate the current heritage properties, we normally send out 2 members from the Heritage Committee. So that would be a cost of $80 to go out and evaluate a new property. This being something new, evaluating township properties, I don't know if all members will want to attend the first one, but if that is something that's going to happen, I can bring a subsequent report to council. But that's just kind of my guess. They normally send two members, but this being something new, all members may want to attend the first one.
Thank you. And any other questions? I think it's appropriate because we keep hearing about the heritage value and maybe looking at that, but I'll go to CEO Brindley because he has comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sometimes when staff works on reports, it might be in isolation, so our Director of Recreation Parks and Properties was not aware of this. And one of the concerns we have is that when council looks at the heritage value of the building, council should also be looking at the functional serviceability of the building at the same time. So my recommendation would be an additional point that also our staff prepare a report of the actual state of the building and potentially repairs and what's needed. Because sometimes we feel we should be looking at both, not just the designation, but the actual state of repair of those halls.
Hearing what you said, maybe to assist the clerk, in the last line, the council approved of the Heritage Committee evaluating all community halls for heritage value, and maybe something to the fact that I'm working with the Recreation Department. Pardon? No, but I have to agree with CEO Brindley. If we have a hall that's great heritage value, it's going to cost $5 million to fix, probably not going to do it. It's Councilor McConkey.
As being part of the heritage, though, we have to go out and analyze the building, and I'm going to use Grenfell for example. If I looked at it really quickly, it doesn't have a lot of heritage value, constructually, but it could have something meaning to the community. So we would just be rating whatever we have, and even if we go to the Midhurst one, you look at the rocks on the outside, you look at certain details, and those were the items that become the heritage part of it. So we will just do a report to say what is heritage and what the value is. We would not be working with staff to say, how do you put this together and how much repairs. We would bring that information, and a separate report would come from staff to say what, the repair value, if it's repairable or what your feelings are. But to keep it moving forward, we are just asked to say, what is the heritage value, the history, and what is the heritage, how does it rate as a heritage opportunity? Because I'll tell you, if something gets torn down, I'm going to use Midhurst for an example, you're going to have a lot of people screaming because I have heard those rocks came from the area, different things like that. And so you do want to know before somebody's going to come to you and say, or Aunt Mills, you've got the old schoolhouse and that. But you might look in it and we might find that some have been changed. I can't tell you what the value is right now, but I think you need to know that when you make decisions, same as you have to know from recreation, but it's 2 separate reports.
Okay, thank you, CEO Brindley.
No, Mr. Mayor, I'll agree with Councilor McConkey. No, it should be 2 separate reports, but our concern is, as I mentioned, also this is from an asset management standpoint, that we should also separately assess those buildings from a state of repair and also from the standpoint of asset management. And I agree, they should be 2 separate reports.
No, and after Councilor McConkey's excellent explanation, I would totally agree. Now, the only thing is, because we don't know how many visitors are going to be and how much extra dollars there will be, how do we deal with that? And from a operational perspective, is there any headroom in the budget right now for the Heritage Committee that some visits could take place in this year and not blow the budget, or just some guidance? CEO Brindley?
Mr. Mayor, I think the work of the Heritage Committee isn't that expensive. It's just some per diem time. I don't think it's, but we would probably coming back to council as staff on the second item, which would be the asset management portion, probably with a little more detail on how we're gonna, the methodology of how we're gonna do that. But I don't expect the heritage cost to be that expensive.
Okay, any other comments or questions on this? Okay, Councillor McConkey.
I have a question because I think I have a different opinion than the deputy clerk, but I understood that we as the Heritage, I don't get paid, but the Heritage Committee gets paid for each meeting. But I know that many of us go out and we go and look at, evaluate things. I thought that that was on a volunteer basis. I never, I don't believe in the past some people have gotten paid for when they go and evaluate. Like today, we have to go for the income the tax purposes and that. I don't believe we submit and get additional money. Same as I don't believe this is an additional money to go and evaluate these halls. It will be on a volunteer basis is what I was understood. So maybe we have to clarify that with the Heritage Committee as to whether they were doing it volunteer for the taxation and whether they would continue to do this as a volunteer.
And actually, I will pick up on a comment, and maybe before you comment, during my time in the Committee of Adjustment, we got paid for meetings. We did not get paid to visit properties. Period.
And through your mayor, to Councillor McConkey, is depending on how the committee chooses to do the first couple ones, because if it's a group, if it's the whole committee that's going to be attending the first one, then that's considered a meeting, whether it's a special meeting or a regular meeting. Quorum's present, so that would be considered a meeting. If they move forward and evaluate it separately, like they do the tax rebate program evaluations, then that wouldn't be covered under there. But it's how the committee will be moving forward with how they want to evaluate. And this evaluation is different from the tax rebate programs that you guys go out and review annually. This is evaluating a property specifically for a heritage value and designation. It's not an annual for the rebate program.
I think the clerk, I think we want to do an Councillor Coghlan?
Thank you, Mayor French, and through yourself to either Councillor McConkey or the Deputy Clerk. Would it be possible for the next regular meeting of Heritage to be, the location to be rescheduled to somewhere else, and then there's no further budget implication?
If that's the way that the committee would like to proceed, yes.
Councillor McConkey?
That was the plan, is like we were going to be flexible to have that our next meeting was going to be at the MIT, but because of the schedules, it couldn't be. So I suggest that that's what would be the proposal in the future. Like I will talk about the costs with the committee, but I believe that that should be the proposal. And the only reason that we all want to go is there's new members and they've never done it before. So it is interesting, and you know, if you wanted to come, I'm sure you'd be welcome, but it's more that that's the reason we want to get the majority.
Madam Clerk?
Thank you. And also to keep in mind, when we budget for the year, we budget for every member to attend every single meeting. So there's always wiggle room when members are absent. We never have 100% attendance at 100% of the meetings.
Okay, so I think we know what's happening and where it's going. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor? Oh, Councillor Coghlan?
Sorry, my apologies. Are we removing the the additional meeting part, so there's no budget implication then?
Yeah, there should be.
Because it indicates in the report that there's a budget.
I'll just read that the report from the Deputy Clerk regarding Heritage Committee's request to evaluate community halls dated May 16, 2018 be received and the Council approve the Heritage Committee evaluating all community halls for heritage values starting with Midhurst Hall in 2018. We don't talk about remuneration. All those in favor? Carried. And I need a mover and a seconder to extend, and hopefully it won't be a long time. Hannah and Alan. Let the automatic adjournment time 10 p.m. be automatically extended to 11 p.m. All those in favor? Carried. Information reports. And can I have a mover and a seconder to get them on the table? Richie and Hannah? The reports item 12.2 through 12.5 be received as information. Is there any of these we'd like to pull for any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. Now we're to verbal reports and official plan update. Any, Director Spagnol?
Thank you, Mayor French. Just one update. It's much like the previous ones, but we have received some revised versions of the draft discussion paper and growth management strategy. Staff's preparing to send that off to the county for review by the end of this week. So we are moving forward on that item to try to get some comments from the county so that we can be in a position to release that report publicly for review.
Maybe just give a brief update. Has there been much conversation on the county's municipal comprehensive review? Because it's going to impact us somewhere along the line.
Thank you, Mayor French. I think more of the focus has been on the guiding documents that have been released by the ministry that has somewhat curved the discussion regarding the county's municipal comprehensive review. Most recently, the revised methodology for the municipal comprehensive review was actually released and finalized by the ministry as well. So I think that's going to, if anything, inform the county's process, and they're going to be adjusting that process to try to start to move forward.
Thank you. Any economic development updates? I know we just approved going forward with the website.
At this point, Mayor French, no, I don't have anything to report on the economic development front.
Okay, and county updates, I can turn to Deputy Mayor Allen.
Thank you, Mayor French. It was a pretty fast meeting, last meeting earlier this month. The strategic planning session date has been changed. That's on June the 19th. That's going to be at the meeting, all-day meeting with respect to strategy leading up to the budget for the county for next year.
Thank you. Municipal updates. What's happening in our neighborhood? Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Mayor French. June 2nd is going to be music in the park, the Gateway Parkette. In the afternoon, EDHS students will be performing. July 7th, art in the park. They're going to be, that's a tentative one, but there will, we're going to try to get some artists in there just to show their art and maybe sell it if they want to as well. These are two attempts by the BIA to try to bring some cultural activities into downtown Elmvale. July 21st, the second annual Sci-Fi Fantasy Festival with all those characters from Star Wars and that sort of thing dressed up. That's being organized. It's a Saturday. But the most important piece of news is that residents in Elmvale will have access to a bus system that the County of Simcoe is starting in September. There'll be details coming up on the county website pretty soon, and I did write about it extensively in today's Springwater News. Essentially, residents will be able to travel to both Midland and Penetang and also to Barrie. Buses running maybe once an hour or every hour. Anyway, the exact details will be coming up, but being able to get to the hospital in Barrie or Georgian College in Barrie, it's going to be a big bonus to residents of Elmvale.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Allen.
Thank you. Hillsdale Garage Sale, the 26th of May, starting at 9 a.m. lots of good deals, so come out early, and it should be a good event.
Councillor Hannah.
The pavilion in Midhurst, staff are working hard, and I'm announcing this so people at home know, staff are working hard with the contractors to get it moved forward and get it on schedule. 2, June 2nd, Soapbox Derby, staff and the volunteers are doing a great job, so anybody that's around on June the 2nd, Midhurst Soapbox Derby.
Councillor McConkey.
I just want to throw it out there for the July 21st Sci-Fi Fantasy. You guys are welcome to dress up and join the party.
Councillor Coghlan.
Thank you, Mayor French. There was just comments expressed at the library board meeting. The numbers and enrollment and patrons, the increase that they're seeing is far exceeding the expectations, and they asked to pass along a thank you to council for supporting them with the funding to open and staff, so they are able to provide additional programming, and it's being very well received. And the highest numbers that they've seen are in Minising. So the communities are obviously looking for it, so thank you.
Good, thank you. Any other, anything else? I know July 1st, Phelpston will be doing its fireworks, right? And we'll be talking about that at future meetings and that. Okay, no other municipal updates. Notices of motion. Deputy Mayor Allen.
Thank you. I'd like to bring forward a notice of motion with respect to the Environmental Resource Recovery Center that's proposed on Horseshoe Valley Road. So I'll just read it. Whereas a special public meeting of the Springwater Council was held on June 19, 2017 regarding the proposed County of Simcoe's Environmental Resource Recovery Center to be located at 2976 Horseshoe Valley Road West. Whereas presentations were made by Simcoe County consultants from GHD Canada, and questions and comments were received from members of the public and from members of council at this presentation. Whereas other written questions and expressions of concern over issues have been raised by residents and agencies concerning the ERRC development over the last 2 years. Whereas county consultants stated they would review and address comments and questions received by reporting back to residents and agencies and to Springwater Township. And whereas the preliminary business plans for the organics processing facility and the materials management facility were received by County Council on September 26, 2017. Now therefore, Springwater Council requests that Simcoe County conducts a public open house meeting to update and provide detailed responses to all of the concerns raised by residents and agencies prior to any further consideration of a county official plan amendment for the approval for the ERRC.
Thank you, and we will deal with that at our next meeting. And items for future consideration. Councillor Ritchie.
Mayor French, I don't know if this is the time or not, but I'm going to throw it out there anyways. Last Sunday, I took my side-by-side, and I went down both sides of my concession road, not quite to the highway, and I filled my box full of garbage. And to me, it's getting to be a concern. Wherever I go in the township, I'm seeing more garbage all the time. Just up around the corner on the baseline, excuse me, there was a Chesterfield, a love seat, and an armchair sitting on the side of the road. Like you could have just pulled over to the side and had a nap. And it just seems to be more and more of this all the time. 2 big black bags sitting on the side of the road. And some of this garbage that I pulled out of the ditch, this ditch has fish in it. And it's causing this is causing a problem to me, to the environment. So what I'm wanting to know is to give some direction to staff, Director of Public Works, is find out what it would cost to put signs on our concession roads and what kind of a bylaw and what kind of a fine you could address if caught littering. It seems like it's gotten out of control, and it'd be nice to do some homework and then bring it back and let us talk about this further, because maybe there's something we can do about it, even if we just reminded people. If you go back quite a few years ago, it was a big issue, and everybody seemed to clean their act up, but now the young kids have come along, and no disrespect to the young kids, everybody in general, because it's everything. And I'm wondering what we can do to maybe bring it to people's attention and maybe bring the amount of garbage down, because I think it's getting bad. So that's what I'd like staff to make some kind of report and bring it back. And is there a bylaw that we can pass? Like, there's lots of discussion there to see where, maybe it won't go anywhere, but at least we can address it. And I'm sure I'm not the only person in the township that feels that way. Thank you.
Maybe Director Spagno, maybe you just want to comment. We do have a dumping bylaw, and we have charged people, because I got to be a policeman in one of them. Maybe just outline the existing bylaw we do have, and then maybe it's education on top of that. Maybe you could explain it?
Thank you, Mayor French. So there is a no dumping bylaw that is in effect. In order to process and to issue fines right now, it does have to be done through the court system, and there has to be sufficient evidence in order to be able to prove that the person who the charge has been ordered on was the actual person who dumped the material. So it's very difficult to enforce. In the past, when there has been issues of dumping, there has been a lot of education and information that has been sent out through the media where instances, I guess, where there have been fines issued through the court system to try to put people on notice that there's a zero tolerance in the municipality for dumping. But there is a no dumping bylaw, or a dumping bylaw in the municipality, and the municipality does actively enforce it. It's just, it's very difficult to enforce, because it really does depend on the evidence that we have available to prove that who the person was who actually dumped the garbage.
Councilor Ritchie?
And again, to add to that, like, it'd be nice to know what it would cost to sign the concession roads, with a sign that illegal dumping or whatever, just to bring to people's minds, say, oh, don't throw that out the window. You know what I mean? If we brought it to people's attention, maybe we could bring this level of garbage on the side of our roads down. A nice little sign says, don't litter. Nice to know what that cost.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, because we could certainly come back with a report on that, because we have the bylaw in place. We can even quote it on there. Yes, carry on, Councilor McConkey.
For future considerations, I was just thinking that I'd like to see a report for a grace period to be considered in the enforcement of bylaws and amendments for any bylaw. There's some bylaws that probably do not require it. But when you're asking for a change into something, it's just which bylaws and what grace periods do we have. Second, Councillor Ritchie brought it to my attention, and I think I've asked for this before, but I would like to consider it before the next budget, is on the trails. There are many people walking their dogs without leashes, and I've run into, like, I walk my dog down the road on a leash, and there's a gentleman, and he has 4 dogs, no leashes, and then comes out of the trail with that. I've been attacked once with that situation, and I believe that, it's great to use the trails and that, but the signage needs to be on, that they must be on leash. Again, do we need volunteers to sort of monitor the trails in the future? Something that recreation can maybe think about. But even if, I don't have any authority really to say anything, except for I did say that your dog should be on a leash, and I'll take your license plate, But I think we need to sort of look at that. And how do we report? Like, if I do find someone and I got the license plate, can we deal with them? I don't know. So, but signs would help, because we don't have any signs of that nature.
Okay, thank you. The only other thing, and I get both sides of the coin, I'd like to see maybe an updated report, because we have a number of ATV operators, and it was kind of triggered by Councillor Ritchie's comment, that, can we have a better, clearer policy, where we may want ATVs? Because I know I invited a group from Minnesing, because they'd like to at least have legally ride out of town to the trails and those kind of things. And, and maybe allow them to kind of ride within the kind of settlement areas at slow speeds. And it would be worthwhile to obviously have a report back on what the parameters could be in a bylaw that we could have, aside from our trail connectors. I am surprised we haven't added deputation, because I think I've talked to the Minnesing group 3 times, and I said, well, come and tell us what you're looking for, and maybe we can respond, but they haven't come forward yet. So I'd definitely like to consider that as a report. Councillor Austin.
Just a piece of advice on that. You might want to check with Wasaga Beach, because I think they are allowing theirs, and see how their experience is as
It's going very well. Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When the legislation changed, there was a staff report that was presented to council at that time. But there is a process, so staff would be more than happy to prepare an update report for council.
Yeah, and maybe just give us the options of things that we could do. Because yes, there's the whole misunderstanding of the legislative change. But again, if we want people to come and ride through it, maybe there is something we can do. Any other comments or items for future consideration? Okay, seeing none. Confirmatory bylaw, can I have a mover and a seconder? Austin and Ritchie. That bylaw 2018-037 to confirm and adopt the proceedings of council at the regular meeting held on May 16, 2018, listed here and be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. All those in favor? Carried. And can I have a mover and a seconder for the adjournment? Ritchie? No. No? Okay. Coughlin and McConkey. That the regular meeting of the Township of Spring Arbor does now adjourn at 10:16 p.m. to meet again in a regular meeting on June 6, 2018 at 6:30 p.m. in the Council Chambers Administrative Center, Minnesing. All those in favor? Carried. Meeting adjourned. Thank you for anyone that stuck with us.